Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to see you all here, and thank you for coming to this meeting of the Kensington and Chelsea Planning Applications Committee this evening. You're very welcome indeed. My name's Charles O'Connor. I am one of the Vice Chairman of the committee, and I'm chairing this evening's proceedings. And I'm joined here on my right by 4 of my fellow councillors who, together with me, will be taking the decisions this evening. And I'll just very quickly run through them. On the far right, Councillor Maxwell Woodger, Councillor Dory Schmetterling, Councillor Janet Evans and Councillor Kazim Ali. And then on my left, we have officers who will be presenting the cases this evening. And on my immediate left is Lisa Chung, who's the Head of Development Management. And then on the far side, Derek Taylor and Katie Hurrell, who will be presenting the cases that we're hearing about this evening. And we're also joined by Lorna Barrow from the legal team and other officers from governance, and we're very grateful to all of them. If anyone else needs to speak, I'll introduce them as we go along, and for those of you who've attended one of our meetings before, you will recognise our procedure, but I'll take you through it as we go along. I just emphasise at the outset that my councillor colleagues and I have read the documents placed before us, which are the various reports on the applications that we're hearing this evening, together with various addenda that we've been given today, and some additional comments and amendments to the proposals before us. We have no apologies for absence. Actually, I beg your pardon, I think we do. Councillor Dent Code can't attend, and that's why Councillor Kazim Ali is here in her place, and those are noted. Do we have any declarations of interest, colleague, or other declarations?
Yes, I see an application from the Royal Marsden. I haven't made any decision. However, I am a governor there. Would you like me to recuse myself?
You only need to do that if you think your impartiality and your judgment will be affected by the fact that you're a governor.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt. I think being the governor of the hospital is quite an important interest. I think she should recuse herself for this item.
Okay. Let me know if you want me to leave the room or sit on the side then.
Sit in the room.
You can stay in the room.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Schmetterling, you had a declaration, I think.
I do know the applicant for 1 Cathcart Road, but we haven't discussed it at all.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think you need to recuse yourself for that. And Councillor Ali?
Just routine ones that some of the applications are from my ward, and I haven't been contacted in advance and I don't know about it, so just to make that clear.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, well that's noted. Thank you very much. Again, no need to recuse yourself. And any other declarations of any type? No. Okay, well there's one set of minutes from a previous meeting, and that is the meeting of the 16th of November, held here in this chamber and chaired by me and Councillor Ali. You were the only person here. Are you happy for me to sign those as a true and accurate record? Thank you very much. Super. Well, the running order this evening is as follows. First of all, we're going to consider the application for the land at the rear of 61 Cambridge Gardens, and then number 1 Cathcart Road. The application relating to number 1 Vintners Row has been withdrawn from the agenda today, so we won't be considering that. Then we will move to Amberwood House, then to the Royal Marsden Hospital application, then Bywater Street, Downing House, Oxford Gardens, Pangbourne Avenue, Exmoor Street, and finally Adam and Eve Mews. So we will move to the first application, the land at the rear of 61 Cambridge Gardens, and I suspect that is Derek Taylor.
That's correct, Chairman. Thank you. Right. You'll have seen from the report that this is a site where there was a refusal in 2019, and then there was an appeal decision where the inspector dismissed the appeal on a couple of grounds, and this is an application basically to address the reasons that were the key to those decisions and the inspector's decision. So, as you'll have seen from the pack, the application concerns a plot of land to the south, to the rear of number 61 Cambridge Gardens, and you can see it in that slide identified in red. At the bottom of the slide, the large sort of oblong that you see there is actually the Westway, the A40 Westway, where it sort of oversails along the southern end of the site. That's an aerial view that's quite useful. It shows the Westway there on the left-hand side and the application property, number 61 Cambridge Gardens, across to the right. And you can see that the original garden to number 61 is basically divided along the middle by a fence. And the application site is on the left-hand side of that. And then there's a retained garden to number 61 on the right-hand side. As you look east along Walton Road, obviously that's the soffice of the Westway to the right-hand side of the image, and you can identify the application site there on the left. It has a timber hoarding with some graffiti on it, which is the rear part of the site boundary. And that's just a closer up image. That photograph was taken at the beginning of last year. And then that's now looking in a westerly direction with the application site in the immediate foreground, and again with the Westway behind it. And you can see the wall on the right-hand side that divides the retained part of the garden from the application site. And that wall is clearer in that photograph, so you can see how the garden is divided into two. And you can see the proximity of the site to the rear elevation of number 61 itself. And finally, that just takes you around the circle, looking southwards towards the Westway with the application site on the right. And that's the architect's montage it's an image of the proposed building. So you can see it's proposed there in stock brick to match the predominant surrounding building material. An important point to note is that you'll have seen described in the report that a terrace has now been included to provide amenity space for the first floor flat, and you can see the terrace at the side there very evidently in the montage. And in drawing terms, that's the side elevation. Again, you can see the Westway up there to the left, and on the right-hand side you can see the rear elevation of number 61. So you can see there the proportions of the building. If you look closely, I hope you can see it at that range, but the red dotted line shows the outline of the previous scheme, and then you can see how it's been reduced in height and depth to what's proposed now. And then that's the proposed rear elevation. And the basement floor plan. That's all commercial space at the basement. And then that's the ground floor plan, which shows the garage and commercial space and the residential entrance at the top part of it. And then that's the proposed first floor. So you can see there the main residential floor space with the bedroom, the main living area, and then there's a terrace that you see there at the bottom part of the slide. And that's the proposed roof plan. And then that's a section through the property. Again, the red dotted line shows the profile of the appeals scheme, and you can see that the proposed profile now is down beneath that. And that's just for reference purposes only. Those aren't the drawings before you now. But that's just to show you the form of the appeals scheme as it was considered then. And that was the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we have some objectors registered to speak on this application. The way we do this is we hear first from the objectors, and they have between them 3 minutes shared to explain to us why they're opposed to the application, and then after that we hear from the agent of the applicant why they believe the proposal should be approved, and then we have an opportunity as the committee to put questions to the speakers. So if we could start please with Mr. Cadry and Mr. Linton to explain why they are opposed, and I will let you know when your 3 shared minutes are up. Thank you. You need to turn it on with the button in front of you and it'll go red.
Yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Sadakat Kadri. I live at 61 Cambridge Gardens, like a couple of my fellow objectors, and I should say at the outset I don't oppose development of the land in principle. My written objections have been set out in some detail. They're very specific, relating to matters like road safety, the residential, the livability of the residential space, and I trust that members of the committee will consider them with the consideration that they deserve. The point, though, that I want to highlight today doesn't involve my objections. It involves other supportive comments that have been put regarding this proposal. Supposedly, 15 ordinary members of the public have expressed support. The first of those 15 comments only appeared after the last objection was put in. That level of enthusiasm, I'd submit, is inherently suspicious, not least because all the comments that were submitted are phrased very similarly, but there's also a more concrete problem. One of the supportive comments claimed to be from a manager at Lord's, which is a hardware supplier under the Westway, even though the general manager of that store had already submitted an objection in very strong terms, which is before the committee. The manager, Kevin Beach, has confirmed that no one at Lord's has ever submitted such a comment. He said so on the planning website, and he's reiterated it in an email today. That means at least one statement before the committee is false, and that matters. There's substantial problems with building on this site, as shown by previous refusals, and the submission of unreliable evidence taints the credibility of the whole proposal. I hope the committee takes that into account when considering the written objections.
Thanks. How do I put it on?
It's the button below that, just below.
This one, yeah. Right, thank you. Thanks for giving us the time to speak. So yes, as Sadakat said, we're residents of 61 Cambridge Gardens. So I think this is the second time we've come and sat before you. So thank you for presenting the case. There's some interesting photographs there taken with a wide-angle lens, which makes it look a lot bigger than it actually is. It was formerly a car parking space for 4 cars. It's a tiny piece of land on a tiny road, barely wide enough to allow 2 cars to pass. And there's some quite significant construction that's going to be going on there. Whilst that's going on for probably a year, there's going to be some significant disruption to everyone in the area, and particularly the 3 businesses that are there: Lord's Builders Merchants, which was formerly New Line, the managing director of which used to come to attend these meetings, and 2 garages as well, all of which are very concerned about the impact that they'll have on their business. But from my perspective, I should also add there's an ambulance station there as well, which constantly uses that road and will also be blocked off. From our perspective, though, is whilst I recognise there has been a small reduction in the height of the building, there's no denying that, it still constitutes a very significant sense of enclosure for us living in 61 Cambridge Gardens, particularly in the lower ground floor flat, and for us on the raised ground floor. And at the moment, we look out onto trees, although that isn't particularly well presented there, but we will be looking out onto a brick wall, which I recognise there's been some suggestion that'll be a green wall, but of course there's no incentive for the applicant to maintain that green wall once the building is constructed. And how do we ensure if perhaps there's a legal remedy for doing something on that? So from our perspective, it will block out light, it will continue to do so. Small reduction in height of, I think, around 1 foot.
and an enormous amount of disruption to the area. Finally, I'd say that this was formerly a back garden. It was then 3 or 4 car parking spaces, and now we want to build on it. So do we want to build on all of the gardens in St Helens, all of the way down Moulton Road? Because this sets a precedent for every garden, if you pass it through, to be developed. Then do we want to go to Oxford Gardens and start there as well? Where do we draw the line? And last time this came to planning, it was not only battered away on the strength of the fact that it was of the proximity and the sense of enclosure, but also the fact that it was inconsistent with the planning designs for St Helens. Is that my time? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good point. Thank you for your helpful explanation. And now we have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Graham, the agent of the applicant, about the application. Please. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. Before submitting this application, we undertook pre-application with your officers and revised it to meet those comments, who are now fully satisfied. We also consulted with the local community on the proposals and the CTMP, but no responses were received on these. Mr. Kadri and Mr. Linton have raised a number of points in writing and today that I'll respond to. Firstly, the residential standards that was written by Mr. Kadri in his objection. The dwelling fully meets the requirements of your policy CH3. The flat exceeds all the... In terms of outlook, compared to the appeal scheme, the building has been reduced significantly in depth, height and width. It is now 8.3 metres away from the nearest window, and the objector the ground floor flat will be able to see clearly above the roof of the building. The building also fully accords with the BRE guidelines on sunlight and daylight. There will be no material losses there. Finally, the back garden. I think it's worth saying over half of the gardens are already built on in this stretch of Cambridge Gardens, and the site was actually sold to my client by Mr. Kadri for the purposes of development. I don't think it's accurate to say that they are all green spaces. I'd just like to end by highlighting the benefits of the application. It puts a brownfield piece of derelict land beset by antisocial behaviour problems into effective use for new employment and housing, provides natural surveillance to Moulton Mews and Moulton Road, improving street safety, delivers some high quality architecture with no material impacts on residential amenity, enhances the conservation area, actually improves surface water drainage because of the greening, and provides a significant contribution to urban greening that will soften the appearance of the building, improve air quality and increase biodiversity. Your officers find the application to be acceptable and that would not result in any material harm. The majority of consultees also fully support the application. There are so many advantages to approving this application on this site that has for too long been neglected and a problem for the local community, and I hope you can endorse your officer's recommendation to approve.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, do we have questions to either the objectors or the applicants? Councillor Schmetterling, I think you do. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. First to the applicant. It's true that Mr. Kadri sold the plot to you, as he said in the papers, but he did also not think that your proposal was such a good one. He did say that. I'd also like to note that you mentioned the consultees agreed, but I'm not sure, I don't know who sent the information to the consultees, but most of them don't seem to live close to the address. And it is curious that not only about the Lord's manager, one of them apparently supporting it, but 2 of them opposed it, according to the papers. So I'm just wondering, to what extent that is important. And the question of the green wall, one of the objectors, I think Andrea Connor, pointed out that there's no apparent guarantee of the green wall being maintained. How would you react to that?
Thank you, Councillor. On the last point, and excuse me a moment while I find the condition number, but there is a condition for the greening. We've employed a landscape consultant who has devised a scheme that's in the design and access statement. It sets out how it will be looked after and maintained through irrigation. And there's a condition, if you'll permit me a second to find it, that requires the recommendations of the Grace Rogers Landscaping and Maintenance Plan should be carried out and so maintained. So if something doesn't work, something dies, for instance, then you have a power as the planning authority to require that to be renewed.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question now for the objectors I mentioned. The first thing is that said green wall, it is conditioned, if it's conditioned to be maintained, then is that not an acceptable cover for the wall? That's question one. And question two, there's only two, is as we heard from the applicant, the wall would now be lower than in the papers, so it would be further away by, I think, another ½ metre approximately. And the question is whether that would improve matters, especially given the drawing we saw in the presentation, that the line of sight towards the sky would not be significantly or at all influenced by the new construction relative to the, sorry, it's not there anymore, relative to the presence of the wall.
So on the first point, thank you for the opportunity coming back to you on this. So yes, I'm sure that there's great ideas of commitment to maintaining the green wall, but they cost a lot of money and they're very difficult to look after. And I recognise that it could be enforceable through planning, but come on, is it realistically going to be the case that we do it? Should we have to follow up on making sure that it's maintained? I just don't think that's fair or reasonable proposition. It's a nice idea, but just not workable. Now, in terms of looking out on the wall, when we talk about it's being reduced, like it's been reduced since the last application. Yes, it has. Definitely, I agree with you. But it's still a significant sense of enclosure that it gives by virtue of the fact of the close proximity to the house. And yes, you can see the sky, and one should hope that you could at the very least. But really, it's not vastly different to what it was before. It's still a two-storey dwelling in a back garden, in half the back garden, which is pretty much right on top of us. So that's really the problem. Thank you.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Kadri. When you sold the property, did you sell it with any conditions on it?
I didn't. I exchanged emails. I submitted an application for the building of offices. I didn't have it. I was told by my architects that it was impossible to build a residence there. I accepted their advice, and I didn't request that. I didn't put any conditions there. What happened is that there was an email exchange which I've attached to my objection, my written objection to this proposal. And in that email exchange, the applicant told me that he wanted to build bike garages there. He made that very clear. He repeated that at least twice, possibly 3 times. And that's stated that's in writing in the email exchange. I didn't put any conditions there. In hindsight, of course, that was foolish of me. I wish that I had. I'm very, very upset that I didn't, in fact. And for the sake of other people in the house as well, it would have been a sensible thing to do, but I didn't. But all that I can say is that, as I said at the beginning of my presentation today, I don't object to development of the land in principle. I understood there were going to be garages built there. I think garages would be a very sensible idea. It has been messy in the past. Some of this purported objections that have been put in by supposed members of the public claim that they've witnessed acts of drug use and all sorts of misbehaviour taking place there. That's not, in fact, the case because the land is enclosed at the moment. It has been the case in the past, and clearly the land should be improved. But as James has said to the committee, the way of improving it isn't by plonking a two-storey building with an incredibly deep basement, a 5-metre deep basement, onto half of a back garden.
Okay, thank you. And then to the agent, Mr. Graham, what was your perception of this transaction?
Well, I must say I wasn't involved in the transaction, so I can't comment on that. I would like to just rebut the point about the height of the building, though, if I may. Mr. Kadri's application was significantly bigger with a basement for this site, which he felt would obviously be acceptable for the area. So we found it surprising during this process that something significantly smaller is receiving such resistance. But in terms of the transaction, I don't know. My client informs me that it is unconditional and that, you know, he's explored all sorts of options for what to do with it. And this is considered the best one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I'll just follow up on that point, if I may. Mr. Kadri, is your application the one shown in our pack at 4.7 in the report, the 2017 application for the construction of a 3-storey unit for Class B1 office use comprising basement, ground and first floors?
Yes, it was a 2017 application. Yes, that's correct.
And is it correct, as Mr. Graham says, that it was bigger than what's now proposed?
Yes. Yes, definitely. If I can speculate, what I think happened is that after telling me that they wanted to build bike sheds or bike garages or whatever they said in the email, they clearly, this is of course speculation on my part, but I think that they never had that intention at all. They looked at my previous application. They used plenty of material from the previous application for their first application, but of course they realised they couldn't submit the same application. They had to lower the angles and all the rest of it. They also, the reason that I objected the first time round, primarily as the reason that I'm objecting this time round, is because they're trying to build a residence there. But in terms of the size, yes, they did reduce the size the first time, and they're reducing it again the second time, as James has very fairly said. They've deepened the basement, if that's relevant. But yes, my application was bigger, and that's why it failed.
Yeah, I noticed the basement's quite deep, but I find it a bit puzzling that you're objecting to something that's more amenable to 61, the principal building, than what you yourself proposed.
Well, I'm objecting, the reasons for my objection are set out in writing. I'm objecting primarily because it's a residence. That's my primary objection. There are road safety issues which I am now raising, which I didn't raise when I made the application. It would be dishonest of me to say that I did. I didn't. Of course I didn't. I was applying to develop that land. But I'm now supporting the other people in the House. I would support development of this land. I would support the building of garages there. I might support even another kind of office development. I don't know. I'd want to see it. I don't support a 5-metre deep basement and an office space and a residence, a 1-bedroom flat. And I think that the proposals are very different.
That you object to.
I'm sorry?
It's principally the fact that it includes a dwelling that you object to.
That's my primary objection, yes, that's fair. And the depth of the basement. I'm concerned about the possibility of subsidence.
I'm going to explore the depth of the basement with offices in a minute, but I think it's showed on the plan that it's 4 metres internally, the depth of the basement, from floor to ceiling. But we'll come back to that, talk about that time being. Okay, well, I think I understand that you yourself proposed a slightly bigger building, but not as a dwelling, and the fact that we've now got a slightly smaller building that includes a dwelling, you object to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. That's clear. Thank you very much. Councillor Ali, I think you've got a question. After well, no, we haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you very much. This is to the objector. As we've seen your early application, which was refused, this land has to be developed, and as you know, the brownfield that we have in RBKC is very limited. Having said that, what would you say would be appropriate for that kind of a space? You've mentioned a garage and the space in the backyard. We know the area. Personally, I know the area, and I know how tight it is when it comes to the traffic. But what would you see that area fit for, apart from the garage you've mentioned?
There's some really good examples along Acklam Road, Morton Road. Further along, you could put a single-story place there for as a shop or a small office. Anything that's single-story would be quite acceptable, you know. And I'm sure there's opportunity to get a return on that. But the principal issue is that it's a two-story dwelling in a back garden. That's the thing from my perspective. Where does it have to be redeveloped? It was parking spaces for 4 cars, which took cars off the road. That was what it was originally, you know. And that was a good thing. That was serving the community well. There isn't an issue, and this is imaginary to say there's issues with unsocial behaviour down there. It just isn't the case. I look out onto it. I'd be the first to support the case if that were the issue. Yeah.
The single story you've mentioned, is that residential or business? What would you recommend? And make it quick. Under the Westway, the traffic of both roads from at the back of Cambridge Gardens, and the bus 295 is just opposite. 70 also goes through, and the ambulance, as far as we go along, we know the road. I've lived there for about 22 years. I exactly know how tight it is when it comes to the construction, the noise, the traffic, the pollution, everything that comes. Have you taken the measurement of the pollution in there, so that if you put a 2-story building and the pollution comes from the Westway itself, is it fit for human habitation for someone to live there? Do you have a measurement of the air toxicity or the toxic air that people can breathe in if they live in there?
We haven't done a survey of air quality for the residential, but it is obviously very close to an established row of residential properties. There are several others that are actually closer, further to the east. The greening on the property obviously helps to fight air pollution as well, and increase air quality. Did you also ask about the width of the road? Is that one of your questions? Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
No, I didn't. I just mentioned that I know the area, how tight it is to turn on, to get 2 vehicles cannot pass if they want to turn in, or turning from Cambridge Gardens, no 2 vehicles, even no cyclist and a vehicle can pass. That's how tight it is before you turn right into the Moulton, I think, street, or Muse, until you get to the St. Mark's Road.
Yeah.
I understand that the business there, the construction in that area isn't fit for human habitation. That's what I was trying to say in terms of the 2-story building, because of the closest proximity to the Westway and the air pollution. If we can have that, I think we can consider, but because of what you have mentioned, because of the height, I don't think it will be the case. But you've just answered my question, which you don't have the air pollution report to know exactly if it's safe air pollution for 2-story building.
Well, the position on the height is that the building sits within its own site. It doesn't project any further into the roadway. In fact, it sits about 40 centimetres or so off the back of the curb that already exists. So it won't affect any vehicles turning or moving past it at all. And the construction traffic management plan has measured each of the roads and all of the tracking of every vehicle involved in the construction, and that's been considered acceptable by your highways colleagues.
Final question, would you consider to be a business one-story building or some sort of business garage or any other office building rather than residential?
Well, we think the residential is actually important. This is a corner that has been subject to antisocial behaviour. We think having natural surveillance, which your design officers and planning officers all feel is a positive thing, would be benefited by having both a business that operates during the day, but also residential that's more likely to be occupied in the evening, having natural surveillance of both of those roads and that corner.
Councillor Ali, if I could just point out that there are, you know the area as you said, there are no other houses along Moulton Road. There are a few sales outlets on between Ladbroke Grove and Portobello Road, and as James has said, perhaps something like that would be an appropriate development. Behind Cambridge Gardens, I don't know. But
Thanks very much. I'm going to stop you there because we're only meant to hear from you in response to questions, actually. Thanks. Thank you. And Councillor Woodger.
Thank you. My question is to the objectors. In terms of the applicant mentioned that they didn't get any engagement with residents, there was no response. How was the consultation period? Did you engage with it?
I certainly didn't receive anything with regard to the consultation. Not at all. The first I knew about it was when I saw your sign up outside, and this is not the first time that we've had that, to be perfectly honest with you. And to be honest, having seen the plans, with the consultation really wouldn't have made a vast amount of difference other than to say, we've got the same issues in terms of the sense of enclosure and the proximity to the back of the building and how it's going to impact our outlook, at the back. Not to mention all the disruption that we've discussed at length and the impact on the businesses and the ambulance station and the trees at the back and so on. It really is quite significant for us.
Okay. Would the objector want to? Sorry, would the applicant want to comment on that, on the consultation period?
Yes, we did write to a number of residents surrounding the property. We asked the advice of the council officers as to who they would consult and to make sure that we got the right number of people. So I can't obviously say whether somebody picked a letter up once it was delivered, but they were certainly all delivered.
So did you want to comment further on consultation?
if I could just add, I certainly received nothing at all. That's probably because of the email exchange, which I've already mentioned, attached to my objection. They knew perfectly well that I regard them as deceitful, and they've never contacted me.
Okay, and then for the objectors, if you were sitting in our shoes and we were looking at, and if we were minded to grant, for example, were there any conditions or anything you would amend in the application if you could?
I don't really see, if you don't mind me saying, how you could possibly impose a condition on the current plans and them align or address our concerns, if you don't mind me saying. I think we're such a long way from being somewhere, where the application could be considered as reasonable and acceptable to the people that are living in such close proximity to where this development is proposed.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then for the applicant, just going through the planning history of this, it was mentioned on the panel earlier, there were previous applicants for a three-storey building, a two-storey building, and now you have this sort of two-storey which is slightly shaved down a little bit. Why haven't you proposed a one-storey building?
Well, we think a two-storey building would be beneficial. It would be better in terms of the urban design. That's what your design officers have also agreed. We think, as I said a moment ago, having both business space and residential space is beneficial to the natural surveillance. It appears like it's repairing more of the streetscape in that sense. Again, your design officers in your report allude to that and make that point. I think a single-storey structure would just replicate what is already there, and a number of those are boarded up, they are unused, or they're garages that have been subject to vandalism. So we felt this was a very positive addition to the street, and it has been reduced significantly from the decision that was dealt with by appeal. In fact, that was only dismissed for 2 reasons, and both of which are fully explained in the committee report that we feel have been fully resolved.
Okay, I'll save the rest of my questions for the officers. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Final question then from Councillor Schmetterling.
Thanks. This is to the objectors. Interesting. Why are you so concerned about the road safety aspect? I mean, I understand Moulton Road is narrow and there's no pavement on the side of the proposed structure. You have to go on the other side. But why is that a reason for you to object? So that's point 1. And point 2 is, as the applicant has pointed out, it says in the report that the area of the dwelling is greater than the minimum. In fact, by quite a noticeable percentage. So why is that a problem that you think it's not enough?
So from my perspective, talking about the floor space, I don't know what the minimum planning requirement is, but I know on the last occasion when we met to discuss this that the floor space wasn't regarded as being sufficient or in line with your view of what planning was, because that was what we were advised at the time. So I don't think that the floor space has been increased since then. It may be above the minimum planning requirement, but is that really what you want to promote, I guess? So that's the first point. But with regard to safety, so yes, I'm concerned for safety. It's a community. It's quite a close community around that area, and there's a lot of people, a lot of pedestrians around there, a lot of people cutting through along Moulton Road. It would be remiss not to say that there's a concern about safety for people in the community. We know a lot of people that live along the road there, along Cambridge Gardens. But it's not just safety, it's also the congestion that it will cause in the area, as your colleague rightly pointed out, Mr. Ali, Councillor Ali. So, and it really, it's horrendous at the moment anyway when 1 or 2 buses start to meet each other. But if you close off the entrance to that road, which will inevitably be the case, whilst there's any loading or unloading going on in Moulton Road, that will back up onto Cambridge Gardens and then onto Ladbroke Grove. So it really will have quite a severe effect on the area whilst the building's being done.
Right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to questions to officers and colleagues. I think I'm actually going to go first, if I may. Chair's prerogative. I've got a few questions to ask Mr. Taylor, and I'll quickly run through them all and then let him respond. The first is about precedent and whether this is going to create a precedent on the rear of Cambridge Gardens, or whether we've already got established building. When I first saw this, looking through the report, I thought, oh, do we actually want a building here? Aren't these all open back gardens? But I'd be quite interested to hear Mr. Taylor's view on that. I want to be satisfied that there is sufficient light getting to the lower ground floor flat of 61 Cambridge Gardens. I'd like to know about the CTMP, and that there is one in draft at least, and that will require a final one and that will satisfy ourselves. That's the construction traffic management plan. I'd like to know very quickly about the green wall maintenance and whether we can enforce that to be continually maintained. And fifthly, I'd like to know, or have it confirmed to me, I think I'm correct, that an additional dwelling is supported in policy terms, and therefore we should look favourably upon that. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, the first of those 5 questions relates to precedent. I mean, I think that the committee will be familiar with the concept of every application has to be treated on its own merits. This is, I think, quite a unique site in the sense that, I mean, for many years it was just used as sort of ad hoc parking. I mean, I'm not aware of any other sort of rear garden along there that has been hived off in that manner. So I think the history to this site is unique. It's also unique because it's on a corner, and I think a building there would have you know, different considerations in being a corner than it might do further along. I wouldn't see it as setting a precedent. I think if this had been a garden still, I don't think we'd be sitting here tonight considering this. But it's the particular history and the position of the building, I think, that leads us here. So personally, I wouldn't see that being used successfully as a precedent for other developments. In terms of light, the building basically would not result in any material loss of daylight to the parent building at number 61. I think it's fair to say there would be some sense of enclosure, there would have to be. Bear in mind, in terms of assessing sense of enclosure, that the westway is seen behind it, so there's already some sense of enclosure from the westway. The proximity of a building here, I think, would add to that, but that's a separate thing to daylight. In daylight and sunlight terms, then the applicants have designed it to be within the relevant guidelines. In terms of the CTMP, our highways team have looked at the CTMP very closely, and they have approved the draft CTMP. As you'll be aware from obviously several years now of looking at CTMPs, the final stage CTMP is the key document. That would have to capture the working conditions that would be applicable at the time, which would include any roadworks or other building sites, as well as the needs of the businesses that are located underneath the Westway. I mean, that they would be key to that sort of final stage CTMP being successful. And a further point, obviously, is that the final stage CTMP would be consulted upon, and so anyone operating a business nearby or living nearby would be able to feed into that process. But the highways team so far are satisfied that the relevant highway standards and other standards could be met by that final stage CTMP. In terms of the green wall, I think it's difficult to say. We haven't got green walls that have been around for 20 years, 30 years. I mean, there are very few of anything like that timescale. Green walls and green roofs, I mean, certainly are increasing in popularity for various reasons. There is no reason to assume that a green wall would not be maintained. I think you can have a planning condition that requires somebody to maintain something. As here, so if plants died, plants can be replaced. It's it's at the edge of what a planning condition can do, but I do think maintenance conditions are actually reasonable and relevant, and there are other maintenance type conditions. So a green wall could be subject to that condition, and of course there is a condition recommended here.
Yeah, can I just interrupt there to check what I'm wanting to know is whether the residents, if they felt that it was not being maintained, could come to the council and say this is not being maintained, and we could then enforce this condition somehow.
I mean, like any planting scheme that's subject to a condition, there'd always have to be a reasonable view taken as to whether it was complied with or not. So that there's a standard condition that requires, for example, trees to be replaced under certain circumstances. There's often landscaping conditions that have the words "and be so maintained." In enforcing any condition, there will always be an element of judgment on the part of an enforcement officer. It's very difficult to remove that entirely. There would have to be some element of judgment.
Sure, but say that the green wall were completely dead, had never been watered or whatever it requires. At that stage, the residents could go to our enforcement team and say, hold on, you put a condition on this that said that this must be so maintained. It's not been so maintained. Please enforce.
Yeah, yes. I mean, as with any or many landscaping type conditions, that would be the case, yeah.
And it would seem to me that it would be a bit unreasonable if the enforcement officers chose to do nothing in those circumstances, I guess.
I think I'd be very surprised if the enforcement officers did nothing. I mean, they would almost certainly investigate and then decide, using the test of reasonableness, whether the condition was being complied with or not.
Okay, thanks very much. And then just the dwelling point remaining. Thank you.
And then in terms of the dwelling, yes, every additional dwelling is supported by the housing policies of the local plan and the London plan. So that this would add a dwelling to the borough's housing stock, which is due support and due weight in the balance of a decision.
And I guess that's obviously subject to the point that the dwelling has to be of a satisfactory standard, and here we're satisfied that it is of a satisfactory standard.
Yeah, I mean, that's before you this evening to judge, obviously. I mean, the inspector concluded that the previously proposed dwelling did not satisfy what should be expected of a dwelling in terms of internal amenity. That the focus in the inspector's decision was the provision of meaningful external amenity space. So the proposal before you now obviously includes that to address the inspector's concerns.
Okay, thank you. That's important. So we need to focus on whether we think the quality of the residential space is acceptable in our judgment.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Colleagues, other questions for Mr. Taylor? Yeah, Councillor Woodger first.
My question, officers, is the appeal previously considered, it came down to sense of enclosure versus the outdoor space. From my point of view, the outdoor space I think may be addressed, but the sense of enclosure hasn't gone away. It's still a two-storey building. So how do we weigh that? It seems to me that because it's a residential dwelling, that has weight to it because it's good we have extra housing. But I'm trying to understand how the mitigation is effective with the enclosure, because it's still a two-storey building in what's an area with just one stories. It's surrounded by one stories buildings, essentially. So how do we weight? How do I work out the weighting? Is my question.
Well, I think that as with many planning decisions, I mean, you do need to balance the pros against the cons, as you're surmising there. In terms of the pros, I mean, there is a benefit from the provision of a small business space, and there is a benefit from the provision of a new dwelling. It's, in amenity terms, there would be an increased sense of enclosure to the lower floors of number 61. At that point, then, you need to decide how, as a matter of fact and degree, I mean, how severe that impact would be. I mean, by putting a building there of 2 stories, there'd have to be some increase in the sense of enclosure. But that would be mitigated by the fact that the building would have greenery. It's now reduced slightly in its width, obviously in comparison with the ones that's been before. And it would have the westway behind it, which is also a material factor. So I think that the question is how great are the benefits, and then how severe are the downsides of it.
And then my other question is, it was actually mentioned, I think Councillor Ali mentioned it, Councillor Malley. This is really near a motorway. In terms of toxicity of the air, is that something that's factored in? Do we do tests on this? Is that a concern?
I think point number 1 there would be that I'm sure the applicants could find quite quickly a residential accommodation at similar distances from the Westway as this. A further point would be that if planning permission was granted, it would have a lifespan of 3 years up to 2025. From 2030 onwards, only electric vehicles will be sold. So that there wouldn't be that many years to go before pollution levels could be expected to decrease quite significantly. One would hope a building would last there for 100 or 150 years. And there won't be that many more years of pollution from the Westway.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Schmetling.
Thank you. I wanted to comment, first of all, or ask about the green wall. I have in my ward, I'm aware of 2 green walls. One will be produced on the back of a hotel, and of course maintaining that's different. It's not a private home. The other one is curious in a modern mews, which is not well occupied. But what they've done, which is interesting, is it looks real until you look closely. Then a large chunk of it, because it's quite a long wall, it's a sort of a mews with a wall. Instead of having houses on both sides, it's kind of a pedestrianised area with a house on one side and just a wall, a boundary wall on the other side, and that boundary wall, a lot of it is actually plastic. It's hard to tell that it's not real plants. I just thought I'd mention that. And that might be a solution. It's probably a lot less maintenance. But the question is, what happens if the owner changes of those premises? Will the condition be enforceable? Because I've seen, and there was a whole question you raised of enforceability, because I saw it, I think in the application that's been withdrawn, there was a case, a discussion, I would have raised the question about what's the point of a condition if things can change. So that's the one thing. And the second is the matter of road safety. From what I heard subsequent to my question, I'm beginning to wonder whether that was mostly to do with construction. And of course, there's always construction somewhere. So my question to you is, Mr. Taylor, is road safety really an issue for us other than in a construction traffic management plan? Because there's a long-term issue of people going in and out of a house that has no pavement in front. And my third question is simply the 60 odd square meters that is mentioned, that how much above that, if you know offhand, how much above that, above the minimum standard is it? If you have it to hand. But I think it is above, isn't it? 50 something is the minimum. And we can argue it's not enough, 56 or whatever it is, but do you have a figure?
Okay, so taking the last point there first, the national floor space standard would be 58 square metres, and this would provide 63,
okay.
So that they're comfortably in excess of the minimum standard. Do bear in mind that the national floor space standard of 58 doesn't necessarily mean planning permission should be refused if something was 57 or 56. Either it's a standard, but anyway, in this case, they exceed it comfortably by 5.
Do you have a number for the London standard?
Well, it's the national standards that would apply to this.
Okay.
In terms of safety, well, of course, safety is a material consideration. I mean, it's quite common, for example, in a mews situation, for a lot of properties to have doorways that open directly out into a mews. This is quite busy, clearly with New Line sort of immediately opposite. I mean, there are lots of business vehicles that move along here. I think business traffic that would be generated by a small office of this scale or a small dwelling of that scale would be quite minor in comparison with the traffic that would anyway be generated in Malton Mews from the businesses already there. I mean, I don't know how many New Line vehicles arrive every day, but I'm sure there'd be far more of them than there would ever be drawn to this unit if planning permission is granted. So that I wouldn't expect the additional service traffic or other traffic in relation to this building to be significant.
Sorry, could I just interject there? I wasn't thinking of the service traffic, extra traffic generated. I'm thinking of, well, somebody stepping out the house, forgetting there's no pavement and just running into the road. Because it's not really a mews, as was pointed out in the report. It's called mews, but it isn't really. I mean, I can't say what the traffic's like during the day because I haven't been there very often, but I have been there, but not perhaps at busy times. So that's the safety angle, perhaps.
Yeah, but it's a material consideration. I mean, it's to refuse permission on the basis that there would be too high a risk to people living there or working there, I think would be very difficult because most people would be expected to look out before they step out. I mean, it's that there'll be lots of places, particularly in mews, as I say, where businesses or dwellings do open straight out into a road surface.
And finally, the well, I suppose you answered it to Councillor O'Connor, to the Chair, about enforceability of a green wall, well, especially in my mind, if the ownership changes.
A planning condition runs with the land, so essentially, no matter how many times the building changed ownership, that condition would continue to bite.
And then just finally on the point Councillor Schmetterling raised about the prospect of plastic plants and the green wall, which horrified me. What could be done about that?
I mean, I confess Councillor Schmetterling made me think at that point. I mean, it's relatively recently, my wife and I were walking around the city. It's amazing when it's quite empty, actually. But there's a fantastic green wall somewhere near Fenchurch Street that we were examining, and it was amazing. From a distance, it looked really impressive. And it was actually true. When you went up close, you could see that they did have a mixture of real plants and plastic plants. So I've seen exactly what you're thinking there. I mean, I don't know if that's a problem, because from a distance it did look very impressive. So, I mean, I'm not sure it's necessarily a problem. But I'd take the point. I mean, I think the way around that would be probably, if you were minded to grant permission, to actually add a condition requiring details of the green wall, so we could be sure as to what it would actually contain, and what it wouldn't contain. It's, but yeah, that's an interesting point. Actually.
All right. Well, final question, Councillor Ali, and then we must move on.
Thank you. Yes, there's been mentioned the access to the flat will be Milton Road. Is there any other properties or flats or homes that have access from Milton Road? I'm not referring to the back garden, just referring to a flat, if there's any one. The second point is the commercial unit will be accessed from the Milton Mews. I wonder if there is also any other commercial, knowing that the narrow of the road is and there is no pavement on that side. Is there any other commercial units that have access from Milton Mews?
I mean, in Milton Mews itself, as you can see from that photograph, I mean, there's a garage on the left-hand side that obviously opens straight out into the Mews. That's the only photograph I've got handy, so I think there are no other openings or accesses opening into Milton Mews. I think that's the only one.
Right.
But that's not on the same side of the road that we're talking about, is it? It's opposite.
No, the garage that you see there would be opposite. So the application site in that photograph is on the right-hand corner.
Thanks very much. I think we better move on. We've spent an hour looking at that very interesting debate. And now, colleagues, we have the opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves, should we wish, how we are going to deal with this. Councillor Woodrow, I think you've got a view you'd like to put forward.
I mean, I basically feel pretty uncomfortable about this application. If it was a one-storey building, I think it would be fine. It would fit in. But it doesn't. It's a two-storey building. It sticks out, and I think that sense of enclosure, in relative terms, I think we shouldn't just build houses for the sake of it, that we need to build more houses. This actually does impact the area, and for the sake of one new unit, I don't think it's worth it. I think it has too many negatives, so I vote against this.
Okay, there's a view. Councillor Ali?
Knowing the area and the need for housing in the borough is greater than anything anywhere else in the country, I believe. Having said that, the type of buildings that we're building in the borough has to be fit for human habitation, not only air toxicity and the air environment, air pollution, but the area is being proposed. I think this area, in terms of what we know from it in everyday life, it should be a commercial unit rather than residential. So one-story building for a commercial unit will be the best fit rather than for residential. So for that reason, I will be voting against this application.
All right. And Councillor Schmetterling, Councillor Evans, do you wish to proffer a view? You don't have to.
I would be in favor of the application as long as there are the appropriate conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Schmetterling?
I have to say, it is very difficult. I know Mr. Taylor said that it wouldn't be precedent-setting, and I would hope it isn't, but I'm still pondering, because I think it would, I have a feeling it might, having seen some other cases elsewhere. So I'm still thinking.
Right.
For a minute or two, half a minute maybe.
All right, well, we've had some interesting points there, and I don't know how we're going to vote on this, but I am somewhat reassured by some of the points Mr. Taylor made in response to my questions, and I do think, for what it's worth, when we come to vote on it, we should vote on a slightly amended motion that includes the submission of details of any green wall, as Mr. Taylor suggested, condition number 20, and yeah, I don't think I've got any more to add, really. We've covered it fairly comprehensively, so I think we shall move to a vote, and the recommendation is that the committee authorises...
Chairman, before you do vote on the recommendation, can we just explore condition 20? Because at the moment it's saying basically the recommendation of this landscape and maintenance scheme shall be carried out and maintained. So how is that, how are we going to change that? Because obviously if we say we want details of the green wall is probably part of the scheme. So we just need to fiddle around with condition 20. Or
I think we just submit details for approval by officers, and then after that we approve on the basis that it's so maintained. Is that right?
Yes, I think that, I mean, I think that we would need to look at the wording of condition 20,
Sure.
just to make sure there was no doubling up or inconsistency.
Of course, but we normally leave that to officers to sort out exactly the wording afterwards, once you know the desire, will of the committee, as it were. Yeah.
Yes, that would be fine, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is that all right? Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move back to voting on the recommendation.
Chair, sorry, it's Dory on your right.
Mr. Schmetterling.
So there's one perhaps minor point, we're talking about conditions, which I forgot to raise. One of the objectors pointed out that about the roof lights. I think that's the right, about roof lights. And the question is, can frosted glass be conditioned? Because of overlooking or underlooking, looking upwards.
So this is the roof lights of the development.
Mr. Kadri's objection, I think. Yes, Mr. Kadri's objection. Point C.
Yeah. So he appears to be concerned about overlooking into the development from higher up number 61.
If it's conditioned, then any successor has to comply. It's only mitigation, as he says, but it's...
I'm not convinced that it's not exactly benefiting number 61, and I'm not sure we need to speak for the applicant who doesn't appear to have proposed opaque glass, unless I've misunderstood. No. Very good of Mr. Kadri to propose that, but I don't think we need to go down that road. Okay, so finally, this time we will move to vote on the recommendation with the slight change to condition 20 that we've discussed, and the proposal is to grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking agreement to secure the matters in section 7 of this report and the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Could I please see from each of the committee in turn, Councillor Ali?
I will refuse this application on the basis of sense of inclusion of Cambridge Gardens, as well as the area not fit for residential.
Okay, so that's voting against. Yep.
I would grant with conditions amended.
And Councillor Schmetterling, are you in favour of the motion as slightly amended? Oh, all right, I will on this occasion. Councillor Woodger, I think we know.
For the sense of enclosure and the potential precedents would set for a two-storey building in that area, I would vote for refuse.
Councillor Schmetterling.
Yes, I'm also concerned about the potential precedent, even though Mr. Taylor said it shouldn't or won't. I would refuse this one. Vote against.
And I would have voted, well, I will vote in favour, but that is nonetheless not approved, and therefore we need to we need to produce a motion for why the committee is refusing planning permission, and I think we've heard that the reasons that those members of the committee who voted against it have given are all to do with sense of enclosure. And possibly the height of the building, that it should be a one-storey building. And precedence. I'm not sure precedence is where we should be going. I think it's sense of enclosure and the height of the building. Mr. Taylor, what do you think?
Well, I think obviously it has to be the committee's final decision, but I mean, my advice would be that sense of enclosure came out obviously very strongly in the discussion there. So that's policy CL5 and sense of enclosure. Sense of enclosure picks up on the height and bulk and very presence of the building. The matter of precedent, my advice would be that there's no planning policy that relates to precedent. I personally would recommend that precedent shouldn't be a reason for refusal, but obviously that would have to be your final decision. It sort of runs against the principle that every case is decided on its merits.
Okay. So is someone going to propose a motion that that planning permission is refused on the grounds of enclosure and anything else that you want to add?
Happy to propose that.
Yeah, okay, so that's, if we're happy with that motion, it's proposed by Councillor Woodger and seconded by Councillor Ali.
To include precedent.
Are you wishing to include precedents?
Councillor Wood just said, sorry. Councillor Wood just said both. Did you mean sense of enclosure and precedent, or are we just going with sense of enclosure?
I mean, it is both, but if there's another word for enclosure, it's verbalised for precedent. It's the land. If it's the land line there, it's the landscape. It actually changes the character of that area. So I don't know if you can weave that in. It does. I think it does by default set a precedent. I know it's not in planning terms something you should use, but I'm sure if the other neighbouring gardens applied for something similar, they would reference this, which in default is actually setting a precedent. Not that the policy does that, but you get my point. The number one thing is the sense of enclosure, though. The fact it's a two-storey building in a primarily one-storey area.
Can I say something? Chair.
You can in 1 second, Councillor Evans. I just want to check. I don't know if this is something we should be concerned about, but it may make the decision more open to appeal, may it not, if we go down the route of precedence, which isn't a proper planning consideration, really.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to suggest that we, well, you can refer back in paragraph 4.2, which sets out the previous reasons for refusal. I would suggest that you look at those and focus on elements of that you remain concerned with, rather than trying to add in additional elements that previously we haven't raised or had concerns with before.
Yeah, seems to be number 2 of 4.2, as far as I can see. I would suggest, even though I disagree with the decision overall, that number 2 is what you should base your motion to refuse on. And then, did you still want to say something, Councillor Evans?
I wanted to raise the same point as you, because I don't think we should start raising points that aren't planning issues.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks very much. So we now vote on the motion put forward.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt at that point. It just occurred to me that if the committee are refusing planning permission for reason 2, then the technical reason, which was reason 3 at that point, so the absence of the legal agreement, would also be needed. It's a technical reason, but
okay.
it would remain true.
Fine. It's getting a bit technical for me, but we'll include that as well. And you now need to vote on the motion to refuse planning permission. And Councillor Woodard, how do you vote on your motion?
I agree with my motion.
Councillor Schmetterling, in favour of the motion. Councillor Evans?
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Evans first. Imagine against the motion.
Sorry, I'm a little confused what you're saying now.
So we're now voting on the motion to refuse planning permission for the grounds that those councillors who are objecting to the application have put forward. So it's entirely up to you how you vote, but if you're consistent with your earlier decision, like me, you'll vote against this
Right,
motion.
okay, sorry, I didn't understand where you were going
No,
with
sorry.
this.
Yeah, I know. I get rather confused myself on this. Councillor Evans, I think, is voting against. That's correct.
Correct.
And Councillor Ali
I will vote in favour.
is voting in favour, and I am voting against the motion. So the motion to refuse planning permission is passed by 3 votes to 2. Good. Thank you all very much. And we now move to the application for number 1 Cathcart Road.
Can I just say, I would have said whichever way the decision went, thank you very much for your time and scrutiny of the application. Really do appreciate the effort you guys gone into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Katie Horrell on 1 Cathcart Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The application site is a 2-storey plus lower ground floor property occupying one part of a corner site at the junction of Cathcart and Redcliffe Road. The build...
Sorry, Ms. Hart, can I just stop you for 1 second? Councillor Ali tells me he needs to make an emergency call and needs 1 minute to do so. So could we just pause for a second so that we've got the full committee? Thank you very much. Sorry about that delay. If we can now move on. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, the application site is at the corner of Cathcart Road and Redcliffe Road. On the screen there, you can see the aerial photography of the site. The buildings at this corner were redeveloped in the 1950s following damage from World War II bombing. As you can see in the photo on the screen, there is a change in both the architecture and character of the buildings at this corner, but also in the scale, with 5-storey properties on Redcliffe Road and 3-storey villas on Cathcart Road. Probably best understood in some photographs at street level. This one is taken at the corner of the 2 roads, so you can see there in the distance the 3-storey villas which characterise this side of the road on Cathcart Road, and then the taller properties on Redcliffe Road behind. This close-up photograph gives you an idea of the character of the 3 villa properties I mentioned. These are very much part of the historic townscape on this road, and given their similar appearance, they very much appear as a group. On to the proposals before you. Permission is sought to extend and alter the application site to effectively create the appearance of a 4th villa. So on the screen there is the existing front elevation, and this is now the proposed elevation. So things to note is the new 2nd floor level and attic level to the house, which would match the scale and design of the neighbouring villas. The use of stucco rustication at ground floor level, which would read as a continuation of the treatment along the rest of Cathcart Road. And the metal windows currently present on the application site would be replaced with timber sashes, introduced in an arrangement to mirror its neighbours. The remainder of the 1950s terrace to the west of the property would remain as it is, so you can see it in the far left-hand side of the drawing on the screen there. Also, just note that the design incorporates a setback gap, which would be in keeping with those present in between the other villas on the road. This photograph just shows you those setbacks in between the 3 existing villas. I've included this photo just to give you an idea of the existing facade treatment of the 1950s property. You'll see the brick finish and the metal crittle windows I referred to earlier. Also, this is a useful photograph if you take the lamppost as a very rough indication of where the property would effectively become split. So to the left of the lamppost, the property would remain in appearance as you can see it there, and approximately to the right of the lamppost, you would then have the appearance of the villa and the additional storey added. Onto the proposals at the rear. This is the existing elevations, and then this is the proposed treatment. So as well as the additional storey and new windows, there's also a rear elevation proposed, which would be 2 stories and largely glazed. You can see that it sort of mirrors one present at the neighbouring property at number 3. The building currently has a lower ground floor constructed when the house was built in the 50s. You can see it visible there in this section. Under the proposals, a new basement level would be excavated under this lower ground floor level. This is compliant with our basement policy. And very briefly, the last few slides provide you with floor plans of the development. This is starting with the existing lower ground floor, and then this is the proposed at the same level. I've included it so you can see the glazed rear extension, but other than that, the footprint at this floor level is unaltered. This is the proposed ground floor level. This just shows the new stepped porch and entrance to the property. And lastly, this slide shows you the proposed basement, which would extend into the courtyard area at the property. And this photograph just shows you that courtyard area under which the basement would be excavated. And those are the slides. I would just draw your attention to the addendum. There are 2 further objections received. The applicant has also provided some written commentary which was circulated to you earlier today and is in the separate pack along with your addendum. As the applicant no longer has the opportunity to speak, I'd encourage you just to read that if you haven't already. Thank you.
Sorry, could you just explain that point again? You said the applicant no longer has the opportunity to speak.
Yes, sorry, I thought, Chairman, you'd been made aware. The objector who was registered to speak against this proposal unfortunately can't attend the meeting tonight. They're actually in Australia. They were under the impression that we could accommodate it through a hybrid setup, which of course we are unable to do.
Beg your pardon, I'm not sure I was told about that. Or
Quite late on in terms of confirmation, so.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Well, that's rather disappointing. Can we not hear from the applicant nonetheless?
No, it's against our procedural rules, Chairman. The applicant only speaks if there's an objector to speak.
Okay. Well, there we are. We've read the papers. So, colleagues, sadly we can't question the parties. How would we like to proceed with questions to Katie Howell? Does anyone have any? I have a question. If you don't need to sort of scrape around for a question, I have some. I would like to explore a couple of design issues, if I may, and those are the porches. If we could look at the street elevation, please, and compare number 1 that's proposed to number 3. I think it's pretty clear that the idea is to imitate I don't know, it sounds pejorative, to produce some kind of equivalent house to number 3, and the details are pretty similar. The eaves overhang the first floor balcony, the majority of the window treatments. The porch is different. I did want to ask the applicant about this, especially as I think the applicant is also the architect, but I'm not allowed to do that. Am I allowed to ask questions? Still not.
No,
No.
Chairman, sorry.
Even if we can't hear the 3-minute spiel. So I'll ask Katie instead. What do we think about that porch detail and the sort of inverted front door, as it were, with those pillars or pilasters or whatever they are? That caught my eye. I wasn't quite sure about that, and I also wasn't quite sure about the lack of chimneys on the building. And I know the chimneys would purely be decorative and to make the building look like its neighbour, but I still wonder whether we ought to require them rather than having this house that looks possibly slightly odd when all the neighbours have chimneys down on the hips like that. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you rightly have highlighted sort of the two main differences. The development clearly is trying to mimic or replicate the appearance of the villas, and those are, I suppose, the obvious discrepancies. In terms of the entrance and the porch, that comes about given the fact that the property has an existing lower ground floor, and so the entrance already is raised with steps, but you could perhaps argue that it could be treated slightly differently. Maybe the pillars aren't needed, and then the sort of difference might be less apparent if it was more subtle. That could be dealt with, I think. If you have a look at condition 3, we do ask for further details of the proposed elevation, including details of the rustication at ground floor level, all new doors, windows and balustrading, because we want to see more of that. We could certainly make a note that it was committee's intention that that entrance should be revisited and perhaps pared down in its design, if that was how you wished it to be. In terms of the chimneys, it is difficult without being able to ask the question of the applicant, whether they would be minded to agree to add them. That's something that perhaps would be more difficult, I think, to deal with by way of condition. I think we would need to seek an amended plan to secure that rather than deal with it by that way. So I suppose it depends how your fellow colleagues feel on that.
I have a feeling that the applicant would be prepared to agree to add some chimneys. Colleagues, what do we think?
I had one question to the objective. Not here. So, I think, you mean in terms of which way to go on this application?
Well, no, just on my sort of design points, first of all.
I think you've raised a good point there, but on the other hand, he doesn't have to match exactly what there is. There are plenty of streets in the borough that have houses next to each other that are very similar but not identical. So I think it'd be nice perhaps if some adjustment were made, as you suggested. But I don't have a fundamental problem with the fact that it's not identical.
Well, I suggest, given that we've got this difficulty of not really being able to have a conversation with the applicant, that we will have to leave it up to officers, but if we're minded to approve it. But I think we should, and I'd be interested to hear the rest of the committee's view, possibly convey our collective view to officers that we might want close scrutiny to be given to the idea of chimneys and the porch treatment. I'm not saying that either's necessarily wrong as it is, but I think they should just be looked at and we satisfy ourselves, and hopefully the applicant might come forward with a proposal to add chimneys or relook at the porch, and if the committee's in agreement with that, we can convey that view to officers for when they come to deal with condition 3. if that's the way we're going to go. It's difficult, it's very difficult without an objector here. I mean, we've read their objections, but we can't really discuss with them the reasons for those objections and explore those in more detail. So that's always unfortunate and means they possibly don't get given as much weight as they might have done had they been here to discuss it with us in the committee room. But there it is. Councillor Evans.
With regard to your point on the design already is not consistent with the street. It's a 1950s design. It's not as if they are, in fact, this is basically an improvement on what it is already. It's a white brick.
I don't disagree with you. It's a replacement of something that was put up quickly as to deal with bomb damage, I think.
Right.
And this is taking it back to the original villa. Yes, I think that's right. It probably is to most people's eye an improvement. I don't know if anyone wants to disagree with that. Councillor Schmetling, you've got your hand up.
I have a question actually to the officers, or to Ms. Hurrell actually, perhaps on behalf of the objectors. What's actually changed since the previous application? I mean, there's also talk of blocking views or something, but is it really a big thing compared to previous applications?
So yes, in terms of the planning history at the site, very similar proposals were approved back in 2010. That permission was never actually lawfully implemented, so the applicant reapplied. In terms of the recent planning history, the application that was withdrawn, it was the construction method statement wasn't deemed to be comprehensive enough, and there were issues with the construction traffic management plan. This revised application that's before you this evening has a new construction method statement that does meet all of our requirements as per the basement SPD, and we've seen a couple of iterations of the construction traffic management plan since, and officers are now satisfied that as a draft version it is satisfactory. Of course we would condition a final construction traffic management plan by way of...
And in terms of the building itself, is there any significant change? Because
there's no changes, no, not since the last application.
I'd like to ask Katie whether we're happy with the materials proposed. There's a complaint or objection that said that there were rather dubious materials being used. Is that really because it's a sort of self-build, as it were?
I don't think it necessarily relates to the fact that it's a self-build. I think with a scheme of this scale, it's quite common for us to want lots of details about the materials. Often we'll ask for samples and further details, as we have done under recommended condition 3. So I guess officers sort of can understand objectors' concerns and share them to a degree, but we're satisfied that overall the design is acceptable and that those details can be dealt with through a condition.
Good. Thank you very much. That's what I thought. Councillor Evans?
With regard to the basement policy, it looks as, well, one of the objectors feels that has not been satisfied. Do you feel that it has been satisfied? And if so, in which way?
Yep, so you'll be very familiar with our basement policy, and it's quite comprehensive with a number of points that need to be demonstrated to us. In terms of the headlines, which is a single story basement, there's an existing lower ground floor at the property, but our policy is clear that when that's part of the original construction of the house, as it is here, one additional story can be added. The other main part of the policy restricts how far the extension can go into the open area of the site. This would only extend out within those parameters, so less than half of the open space at the site would be excavated underneath. Then the other policy requirements tend to be more about the technical things, so that's including protections against flooding, that's the construction traffic management side, that's ensuring it's been drawn up with the assistance of a structural engineer, and all of those elements have been met through the submission documents provided.
So would you say that the engineer has checked that there are no underground rivers? Because there are a lot of underground rivers in that area, and I am concerned about flooding.
Yeah, so we have had, as I said, a revised construction method statement provided, produced by a structural engineer, which has includes site-specific boreholes that have looked at the ground material at the site, and also they review what would happen next door where there's also a basement. So yes.
Right. Well, I think that concludes the questions to Katie Hull, and as I say, we haven't been able to pose any questions to the applicant or the objectors, but my suggestion would be that we, as I say, give our view to officers about chimneys in the porch, and reasonable scrutiny being given to the materials proposed for the building, just to address the concerns of objectors there. Otherwise, I personally think the application is acceptable and, as discussed, an improvement on what's there. But you can all make up your own mind. But I suggest, unless officers have got any additions, that we vote on the recommendation.
No, I just wanted to touch back on the chimneys. So I'm very comfortable that details about the front door and the porch would be captured by condition 3, and the applicants witness the discussions tonight, so we'll be aware of what officers would like to see in that regard, thanks to your input. The chimneys I do think is more problematic. I don't think they can be added through a condition 3 or a worded condition. So I think it would be worth finding out from your colleagues if they agree that the chimneys would be necessary. If they are, then we might need to have a discussion about how we would go about securing that, because I don't think that could be done via a condition.
Can I just ask if the applicant were feeling constructive, as it were, and came forward with the proposal to put chimneys on the building, then we could just all be pragmatic about it and get on and approve the application with the chimneys attached, or we could just...
It is possible for you to delegate the authority back to us to secure an amended plan. I would just caution that we need to have sufficient planning grounds to be requiring it. So I guess I'm saying you'd have to feel so strongly that these chimneys were crucial in order to make the development acceptable, in order to make that decision. But I think that would be doable. I'm looking to Lorna for confirmation.
Chair.
I personally have a problem with it because, I mean, I'm not an expert in construction, but it might be that having a plan showing chimneys requires a lot of amendments to the plans that have been submitted with this application, and we might be looking at a completely different application, and you really have to consider the application in front of you. So, and it's unfortunate that we can't speak to the applicant, but I would have thought that having to have plans showing chimneys is going well beyond what you can do by way of a condition. I mean, the porch is something completely different because we need details of the front elevation anyway, but the chimneys, and not more than one, I believe, on the roof is a different matter. It might mean, you know, sort of quite a different looking application than the one you've got before you tonight.
Can we do it by way of informative?
Chair.
Well,
I mean, we could add an informative to suggest that they might want to go away and explore that option. That wouldn't then change the issuing if you were minded to grant today, but they could then come back to amend that to reflect the committee's wishes, I suppose, as a separate application.
Yeah. As a separate application.
Guarantee it. It's just an informative.
No, I appreciate that, and that it's not necessarily enforceable, but are you saying they'd have to bring a new application?
Well, if you were minded to grant this evening, then yes, we would be determining on the basis of the plans we have before us, and a decision would be issued on that basis. So the only way for them to then introduce the chimneys would be through a new application.
But can't we delegate the authority to you to receive an amended plan from the applicant that may include chimneys?
But Jim, as I've just said, I think that goes too far, because I think, you know, it's not a question of just approving details or something like that. It's changing the design.
Chair. Can I comment?
Yeah.
So overall, I think this is an improvement, this application. I think it's really good. I actually don't think we should ask them to put chimneys in, or fake chimneys. I don't think it's a good idea. It's too complicated, and it's the 21st century. People don't tend to have log fires in newer developments. So I would consider what's in front of us and not try and amend to add the chimneys. I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks.
Yeah, Councillor Allen.
In terms of the chimneys you've mentioned, I think that will have an additional effect on the application form as it is, and I think it will change the dynamic of the application. So what you've earlier mentioned and what the planning officer said, they can be taken into the condition 3, I think is justified for this application, rather than adding to chimney.
Yeah, I mean, what I want is to create a way with this application to permit the applicant, if he's so minded, to add chimneys, and having heard that there is a view on the committee that chimneys might be welcome, not everyone on the committee shares that view by the sounds of things, but to be able to add chimneys without having to come forward with a new application, which would clearly be a waste of everyone's time.
So the only option before you then is to defer the application so that the applicant goes away, adds chimneys. We have an opportunity to consider those drawings and we bring the application back to you with chimneys for a decision. That would be the only option to you this evening. I think
We can't go down the informative route that we just discussed.
the informative is just for information. It doesn't secure those chimneys yet.
No, but what I can't have is an informative that would then not be permissible. I don't want to say, we would like you to add chimneys, and then for the applicant to add chimneys, and us to say, well, no, that's not per your approved plans.
Oh no, but the informative would go on. You would grant consent for this application with an informative, but that doesn't mean that the applicant has to go away and design chimneys. It's just for information. They could come back with, but it's a fresh application with chimneys.
Can't he just, no, what I want is him to do just to submit a slightly amended plan showing a chimney, and that to be approved as part of this application.
But as we've advised, it may go beyond that. It may not be as simple as adding chimneys on the drawings and the rest of the drawings remaining the same.
Sure, but if it is, I
Yeah.
just happened to, I put chimneys on a building the other day, and you just put them on a metal frame these days. You don't have to build them up with stonework from the ground. So it is possible to do, I know.
Yeah, it's just that our view is that it goes beyond the scope to delegate that to officers to secure, to then determine the application.
So I don't understand how we could be suggesting doing it by way of condition if we're saying
Chair.
that no such chimneys could be permitted.
No, it's not about being permitted, it's whether they could structurally be added to this building as it's currently designed before you, to allow us to simply delegate that instruction to officers to secure it before we then issue the permission.
But if they can the applicant add them? If they can be added structurally?
Potentially, yes, but we don't know that because we're unable to have that conversation this evening.
Sure, but if it's possible, I'll be happy with that. If it's possible and he can add them, then he's not going to get told that he's in breach of his planning permission.
So I understand, if you delegated the authority back to us and said, we would like the applicant to explore with officers the possibility of putting on chimneys, if they can, we can issue the decision.
Yeah.
If they can't, we can still issue the decision on the basis that they have at least had those discussions with us.
That's exactly what I'd like, yeah.
That would be an informative, as we said before. It wouldn't be a condition.
That's fine, I've always been happy with
it
an
wouldn't be a
informative.
condition and it wouldn't be an informative. We wouldn't actually issue a decision until we'd had the time to have this conversation with the applicant. So you're delegating the authority back to us to issue the decision once those discussions have taken place and the outcome goes either way. We have then followed the committee's orders, done that exploration exercise with them, secured plans either way, and they would be the ones that would be attached to the decision notice that we would issue.
Perfect, yeah. And it might be as simple as one email, you saying, let's have a chimney discussion, applicant says yay or nay, and then you issue the permission under that delegated authority. I personally would be happy with that discussion having taken place.
So if I can, just to double check, for the purposes of the minutes and also the decision, should the applicant refuse to add chimneys to his property, are you happy for us to still issue a permission? Fine.
Yep.
Sorry, Chair, could I just jump in here, as they say? I'd like to echo Councillor Woodger's comments. I think we shouldn't really spend any time on this chimney business. If the applicant voluntarily chooses to put up some sort of structure that looks like a chimney, maybe that's up to him, but I really don't think it, if I may put it so strongly, I really don't think we should be spending any more time on this. I don't think it's necessary.
We've done it.
I know, but it's sort of complicated and getting it...
I don't think it's complicated.
Giving it to the officers then can't issue a decision. Well, okay, I'm just suggesting that we don't need to go any further on this.
I think we've done it now, and it's open to the applicant to agree to put chimneys. If he doesn't agree, it will still be approved. That's what we've come up with. That's the best we can get. So there we are. So I propose that we vote on the recommendation that's before us, which is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report, and that includes the submission of details, and everyone's obviously heard the lengthy discussion about the applicant having a brief discussion with officers about the possibility of chimneys, and if they're not acceptable to the applicant, then we're still delegating authority to officers to approve.
Yeah, Chairman, sorry, yes, it would be as per the recommendation plus this extra informative to encourage the discussion. But
I don't actually think an informative's necessary because we're not going to be issuing the decision until those discussions have taken place. So the informative's irrelevant at this point.
no, it's just a marker, really. But it's up to you.
I think it's minuted. It's fine.
Can I come in? This application as it stands is granted with the informative that we've said. That's, I think, will make life a lot more easier than complicating issue. So if we granted the application as it stands, but with the information that we've just talked about.
That's effectively what we're doing.
Thank you. That's it then.
Okay, so can I have, see how the committee votes on the recommendation to grant on that basis? Councillor Woodger.
To grant.
Councillor Schmetling.
To grant.
Councillor Evans.
To grant, please.
Councillor Ali.
To grant. Thank you.
And I'm also in favour. Thank you very much indeed. And we now move to Amberwood House.
Thank you. The application site is a single residential dwelling known as Amberwood House, which is accessed from a private driveway off Thurlow Place. Back in 2016, planning permission was approved for a single-storey roof extension. So these plans don't show up particularly well on screen. They are in your pack. But on screen now is the roof as it was prior to this permission. And then this plan shows the property with the extension. The area I've circled in the blue line is an area on the approved roof, which included the addition of planters around the perimeter and a pergola, and was clearly marked as private terrace. In 2017, a non-material amendment was granted to alter these planters. The alteration was to change their height from 650 millimetres in height to 900 millimetres with box hedging above. This just gives you an example. It's just an illustration of those planters and how they look with the box hedging. And then this is the proposal before you this evening. So the proposal is for those planters again, which already have approval by way of the non-material amendment granted, but also the introduction of a railing or safety fence that runs along the inside of the perimeter. On the plan in front of you, it's the black line that you can see adjacent to the planter. So it's important that weight is given to the planning history, to the 2016 approval and the non-material amendment. The last two slides are imagery provided by the applicant, so obviously they've not been verified, but they are helpful, I think. So this is the view as approved in 2016. And then this is with the higher planters as approved through the non-material amendments. So a reminder in terms of the difference between that non-material amendment and the 2016 approval and what's before you this evening, it's the introduction of that safety fence around the perimeter on the inside of those planters. And that's the presentation for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And we've got a registered objector, Ms. Khatib Chahidi. And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Well done.
Well, close enough.
Close enough.
You have 3 minutes when you're ready, please, to explain why you're opposed to this.
Okay, well, as you know, they've had all these changes to the roof, and the non-material amendment that was made, nobody really knew about it. The original plans that they asked for were with 600 mil planters, which meant that it wouldn't be a proper usable terrace. It wouldn't have been safe. They're now asking for permission to put in 1100 mil fences to make it safe and in accordance with building regulations. They have created on this, what was a flat roof, a viewing platform into all of our houses. They look straight into the backs of Thurlow Square, and particularly they look into Thurlow Place. I am on the corner building at number 16. I have constantly people looking straight into my flat, into my bathroom, into my bedroom, and they just stand there and that's the view, and they've got the Victorian Albert beyond it. Originally they had a pergola which somehow meant that we had a little bit more privacy. This has been taken away, and now they want to, in their design statement, they even state that there are no houses which look down onto their terrace. Well, Thurlow Place looks down onto their terrace. It's incorrect, what they're saying. I would propose that somehow they create something which gives the rest of us some privacy, because all they're doing now is creating an aerial view and a viewing platform into all of our houses.
Thank you very much. Well, within more time, and we now have Mr. Laverick, the agent of the applicant, registered to speak.
Thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking in support of the application. It is correct that the original application was in 2016 for a roof extension with a private terrace off the roof extension over the existing flat roof that already existed. That private terrace was accessed by 2 French doors, which are clearly shown on the drawings, off a family room. The height of the planting at the time, excuse me, was in discussions during the application, and the estate management and Trouser Estate came back to us after that approval and asked if we could actually increase the height of the hedging, which is why we put in a non-material amendment to raise the planters from 650 up to the 900 with the 450 planting above that. The Planning Authority, in both that approval and in the comments made under the current planning application, is referring to it not resulting in a material loss of privacy or increased noise or disturbance over the current situation, and also doesn't have a harmful effect on neighbouring properties. The neighbouring properties that have been mentioned in objections is Alexander House, which is actually at the rear end of the Amberwood House and has no view whatsoever from the terrace back, because it's another 15-20 metres behind the roof extension. Reference is made to the Rembrandt Hotel. That is at least 24 metres away at the nearest point, and that is flank wall as well. The properties on Thurlow Place are approximately 20 metres away to the boundary line, and in between Thurlow Place properties and Amberwood House is a new development called Thurlow Lodge, which is a 2.5-storey replacement building on a large property that extends the full length of Thurlow Place back to the Rembrandt Hotel. The distance between the roof terrace and the Thurlow Square properties is we have 10.5 metres before we even get to the boundary of the Thurlow Place properties, Thurlow Square properties. And so the reason for the fence situation is that we had a building inspector that was happy with the increased height of the planters, but unfortunately the approved inspector changed, and he was concerned about the stability of the planters as being a meaningful way of actually protecting that terrace. So a fence was introduced behind the planters, and that is 250 millimetres below the height of the hedge that has been approved. The floor area of the terrace has not changed, neither has the positioning of the hedges. The hedges returned back to the face of the roof extension, which was approved back in 2016 and is set back from the main walls of the house, of Amberwood House. All of this was actually taken through a pre-app before we did the 2016 application. So the application there is in terms of any physical changes to the appearance of the property will not change in the fact that the fence is actually behind the planters and 250 millimetres below the planters. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, any questions? Councillor Ali.
Thank you. This question is to the proposer or applicant, or the agent of the applicant. I wish to know why you haven't been in consultation with the residents and neighbours who may be affected by the development. Or has there been a consultation?
The application was advertised, and neighbours were notified for this current application. It doesn't change the physical aspect of the view of the house from the previous non-immaterial amendment and the original planning application.
The reason I ask the engagement with residents is the issue of privacy. Have you been in discussion with that, the issue of privacy with the neighbours and residents?
There has been discussions in the previous applications, and one of the reasons I believe that Enhouse Estate Management asked us to increase the height was to give a little bit more visual protection.
Thank you. Can I have one more question to the objector?
Yeah.
Thank you. To Zahra, the issue of privacy is important, of course, when decision making in the planning meetings. Having said that, what would you suggest if we were to grant this application, but taking your privacy on board? What would you be happy with in terms of the privacy issue?
We would need a high enough wall so that people wouldn't stand there and look into your house. So the maybe 7 foot rather than the 3.5 feet or whatever they have now.
Applicant, is there something you can consider in terms of the height of the wall? Is there some? Can you consider the height of the wall to increase because of the privacy of residents?
We wouldn't want to
We can't hear you. Can you use the microphone?
Yeah, sorry. We wouldn't want to create a more bulky element on that roof area. We had a long planning discussions originally through a pre-app process. A previous applicant for the client actually put in a much bulkier development on the roof, and that was rejected. So we believe that the footprint that we've got and the scale of the areas is what would be acceptable.
Thanks very much. Councillor Schmettler.
Thank you. I have also first a question to Ms. Khatib Chahidi. Okay, Councillor Ali's already mentioned the question of the height of a wall or barrier, but what about the interesting objection that Teresa Sereng raised? Are you familiar with that? It says the design, the materials and appearance are different from the approved design. I'm not quite sure what that means, but do you have any idea what that's about?
I think that the gentleman will say that they've just got the fence up at the moment, and they will be providing planters to go on the outside. I don't know, you need to ask them. But at the moment, there's a wooden fence.
Thanks. Now I've got a question for Mr. Laverick, following on from what Councillor Ali said and your lack of enthusiasm to take into account what the objector said. You saw from the photograph that there is plenty of overlooking, and you know, the whole of it looks to me like 12 to 16 Thurlow Place can see the terrace. So why would you not be willing to raise the height of it if planters, and maybe put plants in and raise it to, I don't know, 2 meters or something, or 1.80 meters, because obviously there's also the angle that you have to consider. Is that so difficult, do you think?
Based on what has been approved by the planning department previously, it was acceptable both through the non-material amendment and the current planning report associated with this application.
Right, but you've heard with the objector wasn't present in your pre-application process. The pre-application process is there to give you some guidance, but this is where the decision is made.
Yeah.
So perhaps you'd like to consider it?
Well, the pre-application process was back in 2016, and then from that we actually put the planning application in. That did actually get approval for a lower planting area, but we listened to comments made during that planning application, and the Anheuser Trust and Truja Trust estate management asked us to look at that again, which we did with a non-material amendment, and this particular application that's now before you actually has a letter of no comment now from the estate management, indicating that they are accepting that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'd quite like to explore this point with officers, so I think we'll probably move on from questions to the parties and explore this with Katie. Can you just clarify, is it the case that the original application in 2016 was for 650 mils of planter height? Does that include the box or whatever the plant is in the planter? I suppose it does.
Yes, so to confirm, on the plans that were approved in 2006, 16, yes, the planters were shown to be 650 millimetres high.
Right, so with whatever was growing in them, presumably, and then that was, an application was made via a non-material amendment to raise that to 900 mils, which was approved.
That's correct.
In 2017, and now all we're considering, if I've understood correctly, is within that 900 mils of approved height, inside that, a further 20 centimetres to permit a security fence within the planters. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yes, which would not be visible because of the hedging around, but yes, if you're looking at sort of the actual physical structures, the planters and then the fence, yes, the fence is 200 higher than the approved planters.
So it follows from what you said, I think, that the planters are higher than permitted, if they're screening the fence that's 20 centimetres higher within it.
So the non-material plans that were approved, the plans that were approved under the non-material amendment showed the planters at 900, but then they did show 450 of actual hedging, although that in itself isn't development, the actual hedging. But so
I see.
You could determine that the overall screening, as shown on those plans, would be
1.35.
1.35, yes. So that's why the report concludes that the fencing, once the planters are installed with the hedging, you wouldn't see them.
Okay, so we've got something approved to sort of that kind of height, 1.35 roughly, and within that we're having a fence, a security fence, to stop someone falling through it, and because 1100, am I right, is the standard height for a railing?
That's what building control requires.
Yeah. Okay, so that, when put like that, that sounds possibly a rather sensible thing to have within these planters, considering it's being used as a roof terrace. There's no other physical barrier.
No, so I suppose for the occupier and the applicant, it seems entirely sensible that they should want something on that. I think the difficulty arises, and I think what some of the objectors are saying is that previously in the 2016 approval, because the planters were much lower, they didn't consider that that space would be used as a terrace, and so they're saying that this would then facilitate the use of that space as a roof terrace, and that's where a lot of the objections have come through. I guess it's important to stress that the plans approved back in 2016 clearly marked that area as a terrace. They showed a pergola on it, they showed the planters around it. The report prepared by officers clearly addressed the impact of the terrace, considering overlooking and privacy as one of the main issues. And when the committee granted permission in 2016, they clearly took that into account and concluded it was acceptable. There was no condition, for example, added that precluded the use of that space as a terrace. So I'd be mindful just to sort of not to revisit the overall principle of the area, the use of that area. I think that's been established as acceptable through the committee's decision in 2016.
Exactly the point I was going to make, that we're not considering the use of the terrace as a terrace. That's lawful. I think it's pretty clear that that's lawful. And so all we're really considering is the enclosure of that terrace.
Yes.
And, I mean, it's pretty odd, isn't it, that when the original application was granted, given that everyone knew it was going to be, the committee understood it was going to be a terrace and officers understood it was going to be a terrace, that we didn't require an 1100 barrier around it.
I suppose this is one of those situations where building control and planning legislation, although they often align, they are separate, and so there was nothing to stop us from making a planning decision on the principle of the development, which was the planters around that part of the roof, that we can't then require them to put in a railing. That's for the building regulations to cover.
But we often do require 1100 mil painted black metal railings, for example, around a terrace, don't we? I mean, even though that may stem from a building control requirement, we often require them as part of planning.
When we do, I suppose it's more of it might be a visual amenity thing that we are requiring them for how it's going to look, rather than the safety aspect. So we'd be careful not to stray into that through a planning decision.
No,
but yes, in hindsight, I suppose ideally this would have all been captured back in that original 2016 application. But the fact is it wasn't. So here we are.
But so I think we're all clear that all we're looking at here is this 1100 mil security fence. And just remind me of the material of the security fence.
We don't. I think it's just metal. We haven't actually got details within the submission. I don't think we've, as officers, felt it was necessary, given that you can't see it. But if further details were, wanted, then obviously we could condition those details. I wonder if it's just worth me touching on, I know that some of the other members this evening have questioned, could the screening be raised, the planter's height change, and so on and so forth. again, I think given that the principle of them and the height that they are at has already been approved, I think that would be a difficult thing for us to require the applicant to do under this application, as much as the intentions might be well-meaned.
I'd agree with that. And just to be clear, we've got something already at 1350 mil. Okay, colleagues, any thoughts? I've had that discussion. Councillor Woodruff.
I think we're pretty constrained on what we can do with this application. A lot of the commentary is about people being upset the fact it's a terrace, but it's a terrace. It's lawfully allowed to be that. So I think it's accepted.
Yeah. Councillor Schmetling.
I would like to explore a little bit further what the points that the chair made, and I mean I can see it's
be a quick exploration, if we may, please.
And I know it's been discussed in the planning report, but it's still a thing. If you haven't got an 1100 millimetre barrier there, then it's reasonable to assume it's not going to be widely used as a terrace. That's one point. And now, I mean, as a regular place of people spending time there. I'm not saying they will do, but they could do, which you couldn't say before. And the second thing is that we always said we have to judge the application that's before us. So, okay, so that's what happened in 2016. It was slightly different anyway. Why can't we just make an independent decision today?
If I start with the second point, of course, with any new application, you reassess the development as a fresh, taking into account the development plan policies, the context, and any material considerations. But you do also need to give weight to recent decisions. This is a recent decision, 2016. As I said, the plans and the report very clearly showed this area as a terrace. It was very much made clear that the intention was to use this as outdoor amenity space, and as a local planning authority through the committee it was concluded that that was acceptable. So we would have to have good reason, I suppose, to suddenly come to a different conclusion now than was made back in 2016. Your point regarding does the railing or safety fence now mean that the intensity of that use, or they might be more encouraged to use that space, potentially yes, although I suppose the planters that already have permission, given they are 1350 high and are secured, probably, I'm speaking for the applicant and how the occupier of the property, I don't know, but probably would give most users enough feeling of safety to be out there. But you may be right that the railing would then mean that they do use it more.
Because you can fall through the planters. I mean, 1350 millimetres is not tall enough except for children to screen. So
it wouldn't be a full screening, no, it's just some sort of a barrier. I mean, I think it's important to note that the planters aren't right on the perimeter as well, so they are set in. If you have a look at the drawings in your pack, they don't go right to the edge of the roof.
No, but you can see from the picture that you can easily see across. So if they're not high enough to screen, you can see. So an adult standing on the terrace can look around and see Thurlow Place.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. They don't screen it, but
That's
they
right.
are a physical barrier, I suppose, to prevent someone walking off the edge of the roof.
So we can't condition a plant that's a bit taller. Not a barrier, but a plant.
So anything that conditions the height of a plant, again, we go back to the thing that that's not a development in itself. So I don't think it would be possible for us to require a plant to go to a certain height.
I agree with that. Councillor Ali?
Just a quick question. We're not questioning in terms of the use of the terrace. I think we've agreed that that's absolutely fine. It can be used as an outdoor space. Having said that, what is now a question that I have is, again, what I've asked before in terms of privacy. What can we do about that? Of course, 7.7 has been mentioned, and in between 3.5 to 7, it's going to be roughly 5. So is there anything we can do in terms of the height conditioning rather than just asking your expertise if that's something we can go along with?
As I say, I understand the intentions behind what you're asking, and I can see why you might want to try and increase the height of the screening, but my advice to you is that it already has approval at that height, and so no, there's nothing we can now do.
I think we're pretty constrained on this, so I think we'll move to a vote, if that's all right. My view is that what's there is acceptable, or what's proposed is acceptable and also invisible. My only remaining concern is the materials, and I just wonder whether we should ask officers to approve the materials. I can't find on any of the plans. The only condition is compliance with approved drawings, and I can't find in any of the plans anything to do with the materials. And we might ask them to be metal railings. Often we'd say no to frosted glass or something like that. Ordinarily, I guess that would be when it would be visible.
I'd just caution, as it's a retrospective application and we've heard
Oh,
it was
yes.
installed,
That is a good point.
It'd be rather difficult for us to then condition detail.
And we don't know what the material is, do we?
Unfortunately, we don't have more details than what's been provided. We haven't.
Yeah. Well,
but again, I suppose given it is so heavily screened and those planters are there, perhaps the concern over the materials is less than it would be in another location.
It is certainly the case. I think, pragmatically speaking, then we probably ought leave it as it is and just accept that we're voting on a retrospective application for something that is basically acceptable. Colleagues, the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Could I see how you vote, please? Councillor Woodger, first of all.
In favour, Chair.
Sir Schmettling.
Against?
Councillor Evans.
Can we have an informative saying that we would like, or that there should be a little more engagement from the applicant, and that he could contact the objectors when he's having a party up there or something like that? I know it's not a planning issue, it's a courtesy issue. Is that possible?
Straying into use, and it's also retrospective, and there are a few reasons why I think maybe we should not do that.
I think it goes beyond what an informative should be used for. However, hopefully the message has been heard loud and clear from you this evening, and we can certainly encourage that to happen.
I think we'll have to depend on the minutes of the discussion that we certainly encourage proper engagement with neighbours and not using the terrace for anything antisocial, but I think we probably ought to stop at that because we're not really considering use. Is that all right?
Yes.
Councillor Ali.
My decision is based on, in terms of applicants or the agent of the applicant hasn't been in touch or consulting with, engaging with residents, and I don't expect them to do now after we grant. I don't think that will be the feasible. And secondly, we do not know, the second point is a privacy, and I think there's a privacy issue here, and for that reason. And finally, we are granting an application form, a material that we don't even know what they will be using. Yes, we may suggest something, but I don't think it's fair to grant an application form on that basis. So I will refuse this application form.
Okay, and so just for clarification then, Councillor Evans, how did you vote? Sorry.
I will approve.
Approve. And,
yes.
I will also approve. So that is approved by 3 votes to 2. Okay, thanks very much. And hopefully we can pick up some speed now. Have we? Gosh. Right. Councillor Schmettling would like us to take a short break, and it will be a very short break of 3 minutes.
Councillor, can I just remember the next item is when Councillor Evans recuses herself?
Oh, yes.
But it's fine, we can remind her.
Thank you very much. And Janet, you're going to sit out this one. I mean, stay in the room if you'd like. Because I've been talking too much. Why can I get another one of these?
You can have one, actually. I've got no, I'm not drinking that. Yeah, I've got a huge bottle here. I don't know if we've got a stash somewhere, but
Thank you.
yeah.
Fair enough. knows whether we'll get those chimneys. See the look of exhaustion on all of your faces.
What can you say?
The
I thought it'd been
applicant,
a really quick committee tonight.
so did I. The applicant thought it was a good idea. He was nodding furiously, saying he was going to do the chimneys.
I wasn't looking at him because but I'm sure it'll work out fine.
Oh dear, sorry. Yeah.
You seem to move away from the mic.
I probably do. Yeah, no, I'll try to.
Natural.
I'll try to. Right.
Lazy, you don't want to hear what you're saying.
Right, can we start again? No, she's sitting this one out, so it doesn't matter too much. Thanks very much, Councillor Ali and Jerome. So, right, we will start again. The next application is for the air conditioning unit for the Royal Marsden Hospital, and that is Katie again.
Thank you very much. The application site is the car park area to the Royal Marsden Hospital. The photographs on the screen there, I've started the presentation with, as they show an air conditioning unit that has been installed adjacent to the south side of the Grove House building within this car park area without planning permission. Here's that current location shown with the blue arrow on the screen there. So that's the site plan of the car park. Under the application before you, this AC unit would be relocated. It would be moved to the northeast side of the building, tucked behind the bike shed that's present on the site. It would now include an acoustic screen as well. So it would be located further away from the residential properties on Stewart's Grove and Guthrie Street. Here's an aerial photograph which probably is easier to understand. So that blue arrow again shows where it is currently installed, and the yellow arrow is the new proposed location. And then the last slide I've included just to show you in elevation where it would be located. As you can see, it is tucked away, and it would incorporate, as I've mentioned, an acoustic screen. And those are the proposals, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And we have two registered speakers. Mrs. Dambrunil, is that right? And Mr. Vyas. So first off, Mrs. Dambrunil, please.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of the local resident association, the SSDRA, which comprises 100 plus members. We've worked with the Royal Marsden Hospital over the last 2 years to resolve issues between the hospital and residential neighbours without the need to have recourse to public bodies such as this. We're disappointed that we find ourselves here due to a failure to reach agreement with them. We fully appreciate the hospital has been stretched over the last 2 years whilst maintaining its excellence in providing world-leading treatment to so many patients from all over the world. We understand that there is a genuine need for an air condensing unit. However, we'd like to make sure that this is installed to work best for the many residents who live around the hospital in this conservation area. With this air condensing unit, we must also look at the network cabling which this unit is actually supporting. I'd like to raise the following 5 points. 1, we ask that the air condensing unit is turned off within 48 hours without excuse if the noise level exceeds that which is permitted under the noise survey. Point 2, this application replaces the air conditioning... Oh, sorry, I've missed it. we ask that the current air conditioning unit, which has been placed outside a residential property on the other side of a wall, which feeds straight from my bedroom windows, is removed within a very short time frame and is turned off, because the application recognises that it is above the permitted noise level currently. Point 3, that all the wires, network cables, pipework and cable trays are removed from the top of the buildings, mainly Grove House, and placed encased at ground level so they are not visible from the houses. No residential development, and most commercial ones, would not have wires and pipes that are quite so unsightly and not in keeping with the local area. It should also be noted that there are 3 girders going from Grove House across to the wall of my neighbour, none of which have planning permission, none of which have a party wall agreement, which support this cabling. Point 4, we'd ask that the plan for the car park, which was requested by the council in a planning meeting here in November, is completed and shared with the neighbours and council in a reasonable and defined time frame. That the tidy up on the site, which was also requested in November in the planning meeting, actually starts. Point 5, we would also ask that the Royal Marsden Hospital rectify its other breaches of planning in the car park. We have discussed these with them. Two minutes up.
Thank you very much. And then, Mr. Fias, I believe you are the applicant, according to this.
Yeah, that is correct. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the Royal Marsden is a world-leading cancer hospital, and together with the ICR, we're ranked 4th in the world. It's the largest and most comprehensive cancer centre in Europe, specialising in research, diagnostics...
Sorry, could you speak into your microphone, please?
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Just the pioneering work undertaken in Chelsea means that not only can the Royal Marsden offer the best cancer care to those in the immediate area, but also over a wider footprint. The Royal Marsden's been in Chelsea since 1851 and is committed to remaining in the area. This commitment is demonstrated by over 100 million being invested in the Marsden in Chelsea over the last 10 years. The Royal Marsden has expressed a need to expand and extend its range and quantum of services offered in Chelsea, and this was expressed in the Royal Borough's supplementary planning document regarding the disposal of the Royal Brompton's land, where we've expressed an interest in expanding. Part of expanding our range of services is to upgrade our IT infrastructure, and this small condenser unit, which is not much larger than an aircraft hand luggage, is part of that. It's basically the cooling for an IT hub room. The Royal Marsden, as I said, wishes to continue to deliver world-leading cancer care, but can't do this without the appropriate IT, and we would ask that the Planning Committee consider the positive impact of this submission, and we'd be grateful if you could approve the application. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, colleagues, our opportunity to put questions to the parties. I'm going to ask Mr. Vyas what he says in response to the points made by Mrs. Drumbrunil.
That we would not like, one of the points she made was, Lucinda made was, we should turn off the unit. The unit is currently sitting there, and turning off the unit would mean that our IT infrastructure in the area wouldn't operate. So we will assure you that we'll look to relocate it to the position in the approved in the application, but I would request that it's not turned off immediately in its current location.
Well, presumably the suggestion is that as soon as it's been relocated, then you turn off the existing unit.
Absolutely.
Is that the suggestion?
I can assure you that that will be the case, yes.
Can I just check whether that's what Mrs. Drummond is suggesting?
I think certainly I would, because I can hear it from all my bedroom windows, and it's been put there without planning permission, and this is not the only breach that the hospital's in, and it's not the only noisy air conditioning unit we've had. We'd ask that they move it within a month. That's all we're asking for, is a very, very short time frame, not to let this lapse by 6 months, a year, which we have a history of, that we give it a very, very short time frame. We're not saying, you've got to switch it off now, overnight, that's it. We're saying, let's be reasonable, but please move it within 1 month. And if this, we are for the motion of moving it, but with condition. So please move it. Finished.
Thanks. And to Ms. Fyers, are you proposing to get on and move it quickly if permission's granted?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm pleased that Lucinda is not opposing the motion as it stands in this planning application. And yes, our intention would be to relocate it within a month.
Good. Well, you heard it here. That's earlier.
It's good to see two parties almost agreeing something with in common, apart from what we had this evening.
We have regular monthly meetings with the Residents' Association.
Well,
Councillor,
it's paying off. I think it's heading in the right direction. Having said that, the noise level we've talked about, and I think that could also be considered, because once some people work there, and I understand the hospital, the importance of the research it does, and the world, whether it's cancer or any other related, is important, and I think it should be world leading, and we're proud to have part of RBKC. Having said that, we also have to take care of our residents and make sure that they have a decent home, which is good for the environment. If someone has a decent sleep night and looking after whatever they do in the morning. The point that I want to take further is the feasibility of the wires. I think it's important for the hospital to tidy it up a bit and make sure that just put the wires where they want, but to make sure that the residents who have the view of those wires, and if anything can happen. So is there any chance the wiring and the visibility of the wiring, something can be done in order to move forward? I see this application is heading in the right direction, but I would like to hear from you.
we will tidy up the wiring associated with that air conditioning unit, but some of the wiring on the roof has been there many years. It's nothing to do with this application, and we refute any allegation that there's a health and safety issue. All our wiring is done by competent contractors and meets the IET wiring regulations. I'm a chartered engineer myself, and I'm comfortable to state that. There's no supporting evidence that our wiring has any health and safety issues. But so the short answer to your question is we would tidy up the wiring associated with the planning application, which is the air conditioning unit. But I wouldn't undertake to have a comprehensive look at all the wiring that is in cable tray on the site. No.
Yes, to the objector.
This application is for the air condensing unit, which supports that new internet structure that's been put in, and all of that internet cabling was put in at the same time as the air condensing unit we're talking about, which is in breach, and the whole purpose of that air condensing unit is for that network cabling, which on the top of Grove House, it was placed in the summer, is placed into cable trays. It is very thick, and the residents look down on it. Other members of the hospital have told me that they too can see why we have an issue with it. There is a known vermin problem in that car park, and foxes sit on the roof. If you take that cabling further back, again it is this network cabling, to the other side, which is not so visible from the road but is visible from my roof terrace, that is laid without cable tray and is dangling down from a building onto the ground. Now what we ask is all associated and reason for this, if we were to work with the Marsden for this air condensing unit, that all associated cabling, I have spoken to the council about this, including the network cabling, is put at ground level, encased. We have been around the rest of the hospital, and all other cabling, if you look at the front facade of the building, there is no cabling dangling anywhere, and they're using this, which they were told in the last meeting, this back area of the hospital, which looks from 3 streets, look onto it. It is a total mess, and it really isn't in keeping. So I understand that Sunil is saying associated wiring within and pipework for the air condensing unit, but we have to take that in for the reason that the air condensing unit is there. Put in at the same time is this network cabling. It just needs to be put at ground level, which affects no one.
Would you say that? Is there any response to?
We will tidy up the cabling associated with the air conditioning units. I don't think the remit of this application is to tidy up all the cabling on our site or put it where Lucinda would prefer the cabling. There are reasons the cabling is on the roof. It's, you know, I don't think I can just undertake to put the cabling through ductwork on the ground, you know.
I think that's probably right, unfortunately. This application's looking at quite a specific thing, and whilst I entirely agree that the cabling is pretty unsightly on top of effectively porta cabins, above roofing felt in cable trays, and it all looks a bit of a mess. It's not really what we're looking at, unfortunately. I think it's probably fair enough that Mr. Vyas has said that any cabling and pipework associated with this particular air conditioning unit will be dealt with tidily. Do you agree, officers? Yeah. Okay. Colleagues, any further questions? Councillor Schmetterling?
I think it's really a question for the officers, but I still would like to ask the applicant. I noticed in condition 3, which is about the noise emissions, there is actually no figure mentioned. Normally in our standard conditions it says minus 10 dBA for steady sound and minus 15 dBA relative to ambient. So if that's, because I wanted to raise that in the discussion with the officers.
Yes,
can the officer intervene at this point?
Permission, Chairman. It is our standard wording, so the second line does say it needs to be...
Sorry?
LA90.
Condition 3 does not mention the
number of dB that it needs to be below. No, you're...
It doesn't say that, which is normal. I was quite surprised because they looked like the standard conditions 3 and 4.
No.
4 looks, you know, standing on anti-vibration mounts is fine, but 3 doesn't mention the relative... it says 0 difference.
You're absolutely right. I think that there is a drafting error with that condition, which we would obviously...
So I don't need to discuss it with Mr. Vyas?
It's up to you, but I don't think so. That's an error from the officer's report rather than anything that's been discussed with the applicant.
Yeah, I know, but okay. But you... Good, I'm glad I raised it. But it's basically, you know, in a sense, all noise reports are very useful, but at the end of the day, it's got to be 10 decibels dBA is below ambient at any time of the day or night. Simple as that. And minus 15 if it's a tonal. But I think it'll be steady sound.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
And do you agree with that, Katie? That's what it should say.
I do. I'm not entirely sure why the condition has... I think it's an error in our drafting more than anything specific. The noise report demonstrates that the air condensing unit in that new location would meet our criteria, so would not be audible above the background noise level, and that's without the acoustic screen. So with the acoustic screen, we're more than comfortable that condition can be met. So we will redraft that to reflect the standard wording.
Because I think it's an excellent condition. It doesn't matter what people say and do, so long as they meet that condition, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, well spotted. Right, well, unless there are any further questions for the parties or officers, I think we'll move to a vote on the recommendation. Obviously, we've had discussion and something close to agreement between the parties, and some discussion of pipework and cabling. Colleagues, the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Can I see those in favour, please? Yeah, let's do it like that. Those in favour of the recommendation?
In favour, Chair.
Oh. In favour?
I am in favour, Chair. But we've talked about the wiring, of course, but I'm still in favour and expected the wiring associated with the work would be sorted out and tidied
Yeah.
out. but I'm still in favour.
I think it's been agreed that that will happen, yeah, and I'm also in favour. So that's 4 in favour. NEMCOM. Thank you very much. We will move to Bywater Street, and Councillor Evans, if you'd like to rejoin us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the application site is the blue property. You can see in the photograph on the screen there in the middle. Planning permission is sought for a mansard roof extension. Here's the proposed plan showing that extension. You'll note that it's also proposed to include a pair of central dormer windows to that roof extension. This is it in plan. I've included it just to show you that those dormers would be set back to create a small area of roof terrace at the front of the property. I've included this photograph, which is an aerial shot of the street, just to show you that roof extensions are very much part of the character of the street, as are paired dormer windows, as the proposal puts forward. You'll note there are also a couple that do incorporate a terrace at the front, including the immediate neighbour. This slide just shows you, you can hopefully make out the red dotted line. That line is the silhouette for a recent approval for a very similar roof extension. This just seeks to push it back in order to create that front terrace. And then lastly, at the rear, the existing rear elevations on the left-hand side, proposed on the right, there would be a full-height closet wing introduced. And the very last slide for you is another aerial shot, but from the other direction, just showing you the rear of the street. Again, closet wings are very much part of the character, including ones of a comparable height to under the proposal. And that's the presentation, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there are no speakers registered, so we move to any questions to Katie. Absent which? Yep, okay.
Interestingly, the objections aren't really against the principle of the addition, but they're worried about the width of the addition. So, I mean, in the absence of the applicant or objectors, there's not a lot we can ask, but what do you think? You know, you really think that it's okay? I know in the report it recommends approval, but why do you think
Yeah,
that?
as hopefully I've shown through the photographs of the street. So, sorry, hang on, return to this aerial shot. You can see that they're very much part of the character of the roofline, and the proposal put forward is very much in line with those found elsewhere.
And I think some of the comments about the windows have been addressed in a later iteration of the windows. Which is a point I explored with officers before the meeting.
Yes, that's a very good point, Chairman. The very first set of plans that were provided with the application showed wider windows. There were sort of 4 windows to the front as a wider opening. They have been amended to reflect the prevailing pattern, which is the 2 dormer windows.
Yeah, okay, well, for my part, I think this is acceptable, but members can make up their own decision, make up their own mind. And the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. Councillor Woodger?
I just want to say the aerial shots are really helpful.
They are, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you vote?
In favour, Chair.
In favour. Councillor Evans?
In favour, please.
Councillor Ali?
In favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour. Thank you very much indeed. And so, is that Katie's last one? Yes. Thank you very much. So we now move back to Derek and Downing House, Cambridge Gardens, please.
Right, so this is an application basically to change the windows to double glazing at Downing House. You can see there a photograph of Downing House. It was built, I'd suggest, around about 1960, could be end of the 50s or early 60s. And the present windows are timber-framed single-glazed windows, and the proposed windows are double-glazed UPVC frames. So those images are just showing again the existing windows at the rear. In drawing terms, on the left, that's the existing front elevation, and on the right, that's the proposed front elevation. So you can see that the window pattern and framing very closely match the existing. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Again, no registered speakers. This is an application by RBKC. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Mr. Taylor? I have an observation to make, and that is that this is within the Oxford Gardens Conservation Area, and the proposal here is to put plastic windows into some council housing. I personally struggle with the use of UPVC windows pretty much anywhere in the borough, but especially in conservation areas, and I don't think just because it's council housing we should be any more lenient in our view on UPVC windows than we would on any other building that's in private residential use. So I don't agree with this proposal, but I may be on my own there. There are some other applications coming up shortly that are for the use of UPVC windows not within a conservation area, which I think may be acceptable, but I think there's a reason for a conservation area, and different rules apply. And I do accept that some of the buildings either side already have some UPVC windows, but I don't accept that that necessarily means that UPVC is acceptable here. Maxwell, Councillor Woodruff.
I mean, I think it's acceptable because it won't really change the look of the building, and PVC windows are more efficient.
Yeah, you'll have that argument made in any application for UPVC windows in Grade 1 Georgian Terrace. And
I don't think the building is particularly historically significant for it to have a detrimental effect by changing it to PVC windows.
I think you're right about that, but anyone else?
I think Councillor Wood just taking the words out of my mouth. I just agree with that. The buildings of no consequence, UPVC windows are superior. I take your point that you can always put that argument, but in this case, it doesn't do anything. So go for it. It's also much lower maintenance than iron. Favour.
I suspected that might be the view of the committee, but it doesn't change my view. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. You've raised a very important point in terms of environmental impact and the council property faces private properties. But this also is a double glazing window units that will be fitted in, and I think for the environment and for the sound protection and everything, I think the latter one will prefer double glazing units, and more modern double glazing units will be fitted in.
I'm not suggesting single glazing.
Yes.
I'm suggesting timber double glazing, or even timber triple glazing, but timber, not plastic.
I think this will be fitting in for the current condition.
Councillor Evans.
I think the council has moved on, and we now are in favor of the practicality of these windows. And it makes a lot of sense, and we will be able to change a lot more windows, and I think we have to go with that.
I just wonder if you're confusing two things here. I appreciate that people like Councillor Pascal and others want thermally efficient windows to be permitted in old buildings, but that's not to say they can't be timber buildings. I'm sure our conservation officers, were this an old building, would be saying absolutely must be timber windows. My point is that this is a conservation area, and I think the same rules should apply to conservation areas as to specific old buildings. But I don't think I've persuaded my colleagues. So anyway, I hope I've addressed the point.
Perhaps you want the buildings listed, Councillor.
I think I'd be on an uphill battle there. Yeah, okay. Well, there it is. I'm on my own here by the looks of things. Let us vote on the recommendation that the committee grants planning permissions with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Councillor Woodgett?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Schmetterling?
In favour.
Councillor Evans?
In favour.
Councillor Ali?
In favour.
And I am against. There we are. Thank you. So we now move to Oxford Gardens, please.
Right, so this is, again, council's own development. No objections in the Oxford Gardens conservation area. You'll see there from the location map that this is a building at the corner of Oxford Gardens and Lassimer Road, and that is the existing building. In drawing form, sorry, one more photograph, a close-up of the existing windows. And then in drawing form, you've got the existing elevation and the top image there, and the proposed elevation at the lower elevation.
Can we just have the guys to not to speak while the officer's presenting? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. And what I just would say there is that the predominant character of the conservation area is obviously Victorian buildings. And if this was a Victorian building with timber windows, then this would not be recommended for approval. But this building is unusual within the conservation area. Enough said, I mean, the recommendation is to grant on that basis.
Thank you very much. Do you have a point to make?
All my comments from the previous application apply to this application.
Yeah, and I won't make you hear my views again. So unless anyone has anything specific to add for this,
I'd just like to add that this has got nothing to do with whether this is a council house or a non-council house. This has everything to do with what it looks like. And on that basis, I will vote to approve. Grant.
Right, so you've preempted me. Councillor Woodgett? No, I think we're moving to a vote by the looks of things.
In favour, Chair.
We know about Councillor Schmetterling. Councillor Evans?
Approve.
Councillor Ali?
Approve.
And I am against, because this is in a conservation area. But the next one, I believe, may not be in a conservation area, so we'll see.
Actually, the next one's actually 37 Pangbourne Avenue.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, okay.
So 37 Pangbourne Avenue is, as you can see, it's a typical two-storey house with a loft addition in Pangbourne Avenue. There is an application before you to add a basement. It's got a little bit of history to it. The basement that's now proposed is actually smaller than the last permitted basement. One of the key problems that the developer here has come across is that there's actually a sewer that runs and passes across the property. I think they were hoping they might be able to do their basements whilst accommodating the sewer, but that's obviously proved difficult. So they've decided to just come back with a smaller basement as a result of that. So you can see the proposed section there, which now just has one small light well at one end, and then a reduced scale of excavation at the rear. And that's the basement floor plan. It would provide a TV and games room and a gym at basement level. And that was the previously approved basement, which showed a light well at each end of the property. And then that's, there's reference to a larger basement in the report, which is the one at number 39, which you can see there. And that's the last slide.
Great, thank you very much. No registered speakers on this either. So, colleagues, any questions to Mr. Taylor, to Derek? Councillor Ali?
In terms of environmental issues and the flooding we had in some part of the borough, I would like to know flooding issue as well as the drainage issue in the local area. that may affect on this application form?
Well, the application was checked through by our sort of flooding and drainage officer. They did submit drainage details, but there are a number of ways that they could be improved, hence condition number 8 requires a new flood risk assessment and drainage statement to be submitted and assessed.
Any further questions?
Follow-up question. What about the vibration and the effect on neighboring buildings?
Well, impact on neighbouring buildings is taken into account in a number of ways. The construction method statement is there to sort of kick-start discussions with neighbours in terms of the actual construction of the basement. And then the CTMP is there to limit the impact of construction traffic. And then the Code of Construction Practice itself is there to safeguard neighbours in many other respects, including dust and noise and so on.
Any questions, colleagues?
I mean, could I just ask, the thing that strikes me is that every other application on the road has been granted, because I remember sitting on other committees where, I don't know if it was this property, but very similar properties came up for basements, and they've all been granted, and yet the objections continue to worry about flooding.
Well, I mean, I think flooding and construction impacts are still the subject of many objection letters. I think that neighbours will always be worried about those aspects. Okay. I mean, in this case, it's a planning policy compliant basement, but that's not to say the neighbours would not continue to be worried about construction near to them.
Because apparently, what about the SUDs? Can we somehow encourage a sustainable drainage plan properly? Because there's a worry that it won't.
It's more than encouraged. I mean, condition 8 requires a new one to make sure that they get up to speed with it.
Thank you.
I think we fully acknowledge neighbours' concerns about flooding, but as Derek says, it's policy compliant, and condition 8 deals with the flooding risk as best we can, I think. So the recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Can I please see those in favour of the, or please let me know, Councillor Woodger. Yeah.
In favour.
Councillor Evans.
In favour.
Councillor Ali.
Reviewing in terms of the drainage and the flooding issue, the risk of flooding that we had in the borough recently. So I will refuse this application.
Councillor Ali is against it, and I'm in favour. Thank you very much. And then Exmoor Street, please.
Exmoor Street is the third application that you referred to, Chairman, for new windows. In this case, the property is not in a conservation area, and that is the existing building, so you can see there it's existing fenestration. And those are just small shots taken at the side and at the rear. And then that's the existing and proposed front elevation. So again, closely following the existing fenestration pattern.
I think I know where we're going with this. Councillor Woodger, how do you vote?
Favour, Chair.
Councillor Schmetling.
In favour.
Councillor Evans.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Ali.
In favour, Chair.
It's big of me. I'm reluctantly in favour. Thank you very much. And finally, Adam and Eve Muse.
And then Adam and Eve Muse is a planning application for some elevation alterations and roof alterations. You can see there that the property is sort of roughly just above the centre of the image. So you can see it's sort of mid-terrace in Adam and Eve Muse. But you can see from that photograph is that there's a wide variety of roof forms and alterations on other properties in the Muse. And that's just another image again, sort of perhaps more useful than the last one, to see that variation of roof forms on both sides of the mews. That's the existing lower and upper parts of the front elevation. And then that's what happens at the sort of front roof level. So you can see there that there is actually a spiral staircase which is not building regulations compliant, that leads to the existing roof. And the existing roof basically is not building regulations compliant either. And it's proposed, that those are views taken at the back so that you can look each way along the rear of the building. And then that's the existing roof for the property. So you can see there the neighbours' roofs set behind it. And that's the existing roof plan. So you can see there's an existing water tank. And then there's the flat roof, and then the spiral stair at the bottom of the image is the one that's to be removed at the front. And then those are the proposed plans. So you can see there it's proposed to add railings to the roof, front and rear, and to insert a glazed roof hatch that you can see there on the right-hand side. And then in elevational terms, that's the existing front on the left and the proposed front on the right-hand side. And then those are the rear elevations, existing on the left and proposed on the right. And then finally, those sections existing on the left and proposed on the right-hand side. And that's the last slide.
Thank you very much. Out of interest, why is the staircase not compliant as it is?
Because the gaps are too wide in it. The building regulations specify gaps of, I think it's 100 millimetres is the maximum gap between any two vertical struts.
The treads, or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, colleagues, any questions for Derek? Seems to me that this is probably an improvement.
Question I've got for Mr. Taylor is that just in the response to the worry about noise, in the summary table, there's the response is that the noise or disturbance compared with what could anyway occur to domestic property through open windows is given as a reason. But do you really think that an open window is the same as having an open terrace when a bunch of people get on it?
I mean, I think they're all part of the picture. I think probably the complete, a more complete answer to that point, number two, would be to say that clearly windows can be opened and noise can emit through windows. Also, the existing flat roof is lawful. They can access the flat roof. So planning permission isn't required to use the roof as a terrace. I mean, it's part of their property. They can use their roof anyway. So there's a possibility of noise both through windows or the flat roof as it exists.
Okay, thanks.
Well, colleagues, unless there are any further questions, I think we can move to a vote on the recommendation, which is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of the report. Councillor Woodger?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Schmetterling?
In favour.
Councillor Evans?
In favour.
Councillor Ali?
In favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour as well. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the proceedings.
That's close.
Thank you.